OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.
All right, you're very welcome along. It's Monday morning. It is, what are we looking at? Early April. So the title race is hurtling towards its conclusion in whatever it is that you like, whatever sport. But maybe do we even count the GAA? Are we starting to see the evidence of some stuff that we know is going to happen later on in the summer? Yeah, okay. That landed. Hello, everybody. A very good morning to you. Colm is here. Colm, how are you?
Sure, good morning.
Shane is here. Shane, how are you?
Good morning, how are lads?
If you'd like to get in touch with us this morning, we'd love to hear from you. 087 9180 180 is the WhatsApp number, or you can leave us a comment in the YouTube stream, youtube.com/offtheball, or at Off the Ball AM is our own Twitter account.
A more competitive Gillette Labs performance rankings there has never been, perhaps.
Ooh, big shout.
I don't think, Ger, I'm giving too much away if I mention the omissions, because as soon as it's displayed, everyone's going to see. But no Katie McCabe. So Thursday morning on OTB AM, we were lamenting the fact that our captain could be missing for the World Cup. We don't know what the injury was, the extent of it. And there she was, started for Arsenal in the Women's Super League. Got the winner and possibly the goal of the weekend as well. The trajectory, like an airplane taking off into the top corner. Beautiful.
That's a very good analogy.
It was really beautiful. And not the only one to miss out. Adeleke now, who seems to be like the weekly omission from her unbelievable feats in America, also misses out. We could have done any number of angles here, but I'm very excited. I don't know about you, Shane, to showcase what we have here for the Gillette Labs performance rankings.
Can I just say that that whole bit at the top there from Colm was really his invitation for us to congratulate him on his diagnosis of Katie McCabe's injury, because he was like, no, it's fine. Dr. Colm, who, I mean, maybe you are frustrated, maybe your real calling was in the medical industry. You could have been a physio, you could have been like an orthopedic surgeon, an ankle specialist, one of those there was a Dr. Richard Stedman who used to be the only one who could do cruciate ligaments properly. Everybody, whenever they would get their cruciate done, they'd all go to this one doctor. You could have been the answer, correct answer to that.
Thank you.
He's the definition of someone.
Instead, you're stuck here with us on a Monday morning.
That means a lot coming from
philosophy.
No, I was just looking. The impact. It really did look like a proper impact injury, and I was hoping for the best. But I was open to the fact that it could have been a metatarsal. It's the time of year for metatarsal injuries.
It is,
as we know.
Dr. Buig actually sounds like it's the perfect name for a doctor, I have to say. Your name certainly
sounds like a doctor caught up in a controversy. Yeah, Dr. Buig. Yeah.
Sacked by the medical council, which is very difficult to do.
Yeah.
You need to be pretty bad for them to be like, okay, you can no longer be one of us. Anyway, before we get into trouble, at 7:33, here's what's coming up between now and 10 o'clock for you this morning. Are we just getting straight into the...
Oh, you did it coming up first.
Okay, yeah. Performance rankings. Daniel Harris at 8:05 to talk about Manchester United, who may be featuring in the red. Spoiler alert. Alison Miller talking about the Irish rugby team. How are they not in the red? Are they in the red? They are in the red. There you go. We're going to find out. They're not.
No.
Well,
that was another omission.
Sports news at 8:45 with Carl Milani. Maurice Brosnan is going to talk about the league finals. Cian Tracey is going to talk about all of the European Champions Cup at the weekend. And we're bringing some clips from the Sunday paper review as well. But at 7:33, it's time for the Gillette Labs performance rankings.
That wasn't an All-Ireland winning performance.
Probably should have won the game based on their second half performance.
Is it a step too far to say it was the performance so far of the World Cup? Maybe not.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
I'm scratching my head. That performances was just lacked that intensity.
OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave of your money back. Neon Night Edition available now. Shane.
Yes, good morning, lads. Let's start. Starting in the red.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, old school, real old school. Two teams that usually aren't paired up together, but Liverpool and Manchester United will be holding hands in the red this morning. I think it's fair. Both had a fairly bad weekend. The early kick-off on Saturday seems like a million years ago.
Or we can start with the breaking news overnight. Go on.
I'm just going by the...
I know.
Just going by the screen here, guys.
FU San Diego?
Yeah, that's fair.
See, I'm... Do you not like my evolution?
That was very good.
Yeah.
I didn't say the...
Okay, we want to start with the actual breaking news.
Yeah.
The big news. That's fair. Sorry, clearly in the pre-show production meeting, Shane was asleep. Brendan Rodgers and Graham Potter both sacked.
Everybody's like, well, hang on a second. They meet before they do this crap?
Yeah.
That does not happen.
They plan this?
There's clearly no planning going into this.
Yeah, we folks, we do plan this to a reasonable degree. But I think it's fair to say, would you call it a bad day for them yesterday, a bad weekend? They're getting a lot of money for their troubles.
That is interesting.
Well, I think that this is good for Brendan Rodgers. I think that Brendan Rodgers is now available in the market when there's two really big jobs for which he is a genuine candidate, and I think he'll actually be excellent for those candidates. Eddie Howe took a team down, right? And is now doing such a good job at Newcastle that he's considered one of the best young managers in the game in England, right? I think people will completely revisit what they think of Brendan Rodgers after he gets the Spurs or Chelsea job, or a job of similar standards. I think he's going to take a team and do really well, and I think that I think this is good news for Brendan Rodgers.
I was considering suggesting putting him in the amber last night if there wasn't other contenders.
Just
because
Rodgers.
I'm not sure it is a red. And even for Leicester City, I think the whole relationship had run its course. It's 4 years, which is a long time in the top level these days. But if you look at it statistically, since the World Cup, Leicester have played 13 games. They've got just 8 points. That's the lowest in the league in total. And it seems like he just couldn't squeeze the sponge of getting any more out of this group of players anymore. And they, I think, tired of him a bit. But you look at Rodgers, and he gets a lot of flack, a lot of criticism for the perception of how he is, right? But he is an exceptional manager.
Yeah.
Every single club he's been at, he's done well. In some form, in some capacity. And you nearly forget, because Leicester have been poor for a little over a year now, but he got them their first FA Cup in 2021, beating Manchester City, no less, in the final. And got them their second and third highest league positions ever, to come fifth 2 seasons in a row. Now, the other side of that, if you're criticising Rodgers, or if you're on that side of things, you would lament the fact that he failed to qualify for the Champions League 2 seasons in a row. And it was the last game, I think, at home to Manchester United in the first of those 2 seasons where they had it in their grasp. All they had to do was get a positive result that day, and they didn't. United won the game, and they came fifth. But I think he did a brilliant job, and if he had left last summer, he'd be a lot more celebrated.
Yeah, I don't think it's a reflection on Brendan Rodgers. Even reading the phraseology of the statement from Leicester City, compelled to take alternative action to stay in the Premier League. I mean, sometimes it doesn't mean he's a bad manager. It just means at this stage of the season they might need a change to kind of kickstart the players, to give them a bit more motivation. There's not long left in the season, and to stay in the Premier League is clearly paramount to Leicester City and their ambitions. You can't win the Premier League in 16, 17 and then get relegated a few years later. So I mean, I feel sorry for Brendan Rodgers, but I think the man would really feel sorry for this morning is Graham Potter, because that one, Chelsea are a basket case, and we saw it at the weekend.
The headline on the front of the Star this morning is Bodge and Rog. I'm like, Rodgers, Rog.
Yeah.
Bodge? Brendan? Is he both Bodge and Rog in this?
Has to be, doesn't he?
But there's a picture of Potter beside him. Graham Potter. Is it Graham Potter Bodge? I don't. I love the use of the Bodge
Potter
and Rog.
Podge.
It's a very niche,
Yeah.
late 90s, early noughties, mid noughties. It's like
it's a big nickname around the place, isn't it? Loads of Podges. Is that a Cork thing?
I'd say so,
Is
yeah.
there Podge? Oh, yeah, there's loads of Podges in Cork. I'm trying to think. Is there a surname equating to it? It's a stretch.
Anyway, sorry, go on. Potter's the one who you have sympathy
Well,
for.
I mean, Potter's season has been so pathetic that you wonder, where does he go? 7 months in charge. But Chelsea, I think Chelsea is the pathetic thing in this, essentially. But Graham Potter is the. Remember when he left Brighton? You're thinking, this lad is unbelievable. Everything he touches turns to gold. He's Midas, this man. But I think we maybe talked about it in the show when he moved to Chelsea. We're like, this can maybe only go south.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what was the end game? What was the positive end result of Potter at Chelsea?
There was just no way I could see Potter being Chelsea manager next season, and that was a few months ago. And a lot of people are saying he's Todd Bowley's guy. Like, Todd's put loads of emphasis on Potter, gave him a 5-year contract, said he was going to be patient, very different to the Roman Abramovich era. But here we are, Chelsea looking for their third manager in the same season.
12 points off the top 4. It probably had to happen.
But the top 4 was gone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I look, they've obviously done it. It turns out old Chelsea, new Chelsea, and there's a lot of talk of them having to sell a lot of players in the summer to finance all the deals they've already made. I guess when Mudryk is missing the chances that he missed at the weekend, there's no significant sign of an improvement from many of the players that they've signed. And you look at other clubs, you look at Unai Emery, the table since Unai Emery arrived. We were talking about this on the football kickoff on Friday. He's a top 4 in terms of points won since he arrived, which is really phenomenal considering the state of Villa when he took over. But you compare and contrast, and there's been no immediate sign that he knows what he's doing. There's been no immediate sign that he's getting more out of the players than the players are capable of. And I think with the comparison is obviously with Arteta, who Arsenal had never had any intention of sacking, but who there was a lot of noise around when they were not performing at the level they were capable of, and they got rewarded with that. But there's definitely seems to have been a long-term view there, and maybe, I don't know, Arteta's, like, his CV was not as complete, really, as Potter's.
But I hadn't started.
So
Hadn't started at all. He was given a shot.
yeah,
You know, Pep Guardiola's first team coach. You'd actually forget about Graham Potter's start as Chelsea manager. He was unbeaten in his first 9 games.
Yeah, that seems
You
like
know,
a million
he
years
won
ago.
7 of the 9 games. And what was the first loss? 4-1 away to Brighton.
Oh,
Old
that's right.
employers. And from then it was never really convincing. I think the one thing that kept them going was beating Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League last 16, and getting them to the quarter-final against Real Madrid was a good sign. But again, like Shane, you and I have talked about Potter a fair bit actually over the last 6 months. And do you remember the first half of last season when the Brighton fans were booing Potter at full-time whistle because of a lack of goals?
Yeah.
And Roberto De Zerbi's shown that this Brighton team is well capable of scoring goals. So I found that he was in this purple patch, Potter, for the first 6 weeks of this season when Brighton went to Old Trafford, beat an out of sorts Manchester United 2-0 or 2-1, and had a load of other good results. And then he gets his Chelsea job. It just comes around the right time, and it was way too soon for him.
Yeah.
He's probably another 2 clubs away from Chelsea yet, but he could eventually be there because there's a lot of positive aspects of Graham Potter, the manager. We've been talking about Potter for a long time now.
Yeah. There's an 18-year-old from Bettystown that I would give credit for the Brighton goals, of course. But the Chelsea statement yesterday
Well,
was...
he can't set up tactically.
True. But Bruno Salter, who worked with Potter at Brighton, he's taken charge. The statement was very interesting. Chelsea said Potter, quote, has agreed to collaborate with the club to facilitate a smooth transition. In other words, help us find someone else. So this
in
is
other
like
words, we're still paying him.
Your ex goes, will you help me? I'm going to break up with you. Will you actually help me find someone else? You know, you were great and all, but give me a hand, will you? Just like
It's those relationships are less transactional, I hope.
yeah, of course. But the way in which Chelsea phrased it was bizarre. It's like, we're going to get rid of him, but he's going to really, really help us find someone else. It just seemed a bit strange. But I mean, Potter seems like a nice guy, and maybe that was his downfall in the end. Too nice a guy.
Dara Heffernan, good shout. Another omission from the Gillette Labs performance rankings. No mention of Daniil Medvedev dominating Yannick Sinner in Miami. Good point.
Sean Murphy in the snooker last night, of course.
The London Independent have Nagelsmann, Pochettino. Pochettino's not in the running for the Spurs job, according to the Sunday papers. Zidane. Now, Zidane, I would like to see that.
Not a
That
word
would-
of English, though. I mean,
That would be. He said that he would like to have English, but like he wouldn't be the first manager of a Premier League club whose English wasn't great. But just get an interpreter. Pochettino couldn't speak English for months.
true.
Luis Enrique or Mourinho.
Nah.
Third time.
We do not need to see Mourinho.
Enough's enough, lads.
They're flying. He's flying it with Roma as well. They won again last night, 3-0.
Did you want to move on?
No, I do.
You wanna stick on it?
I'm just thinking. Well, like there's, I have open jobs at a number of clubs.
Yeah. 3 massive Premier League clubs with gaping holes in their team.
If you're Tottenham, would you pursue Brendan Rodgers?
Oh, for sure. 100%. Brendan Rodgers just became available, and you'll absolutely take him. I don't think Leicester's current position is reflection on him. Like, as Ger said, he's a brilliant manager. I think you take him in. Like, you have to kind of look around, and I think he's a better option than Nagelsmann. Nagelsmann's an unknown entity. I don't know if he get on with the players apparent towards the tail end as well. He might rub people up the wrong way. I don't think Rodgers rubs people up the wrong way. I think players actually pay for him. Well, he can, but like, I mean,
that seems to be.
he's a character.
Now, that's
He's
4
a
years
character.
in. Well, that is 4 years in at a club where they did not expect to be competing for the Champions League week in, week out. Whereas if he goes to Chelsea, or if he goes to Chelsea or Spurs, he might actually find more kindred spirits. His ambition is the thing that gets spoken about. Miguel's talking about it in his piece today. And like, if you go to one of the super clubs, the players are equally ambitious. You'll find you might find that you can do more with those, and you can appeal more to their sense of ego, and that might be the perfect scenario for him.
If you're Crystal Palace, do you pursue Graham Potter?
No, I don't think so. Like,
The Potter one's awkward.
What happens to
because
Potter?
What's his level now? Like,
if I'm Potter, I'm going and I'm travelling the world. I'm continuing to get paid by Chelsea. I hope his contract was written in such a way that there's either offset language, which is what they do in America a lot, where you get paid until you find a new job, and then if your new job pays you less than the current contract you're on, that offsets, and you've got to obviously show them what it is. I hope That's it. And I hope he continues to get paid for the next 5 years as at the 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 million a year or whatever it is.
Well, if that wasn't agreed beforehand, he's in a difficult position because it's 6 months into a 5-year contract.
That's true.
Not getting much out of it.
Maybe he goes
otherwise.
into media. Maybe he does a bit of media work.
Well, what's the point of having a contract if there's not some clause in it that says if you sack me, you're going to pay me?
You'd hope so, but maybe he was so excited about the prospect of managing Chelsea.
That's why you have lawyers. The lawyers don't get excited. They're like...
They're not doing their job.
I think Graham Potter would be a fantastic international manager. And at some way down the line, Republic of Ireland, Graham Potter would be a great match.
Oh, that's an interesting shot.
I do think that if that's what is his interest, there's talk that Lee Carsey is going to finish up after the Euros, and so England obviously would be the ones who would be making contact with Graham Potter. But I like
Sweden. He's managing Sweden. That's where he's going to end up.
Where's your evidence for that? He'd make good international manager. Where's your evidence for that? Well, that's just my opinion. Where's your evidence? Where's your evidence, Colin?
Oh, you answered my part of it there. You did my part.
Well,
that was great.
But
I just think he'd be good with more time in his hands. No transfer window to bother him. I don't think the transfer window helped him, to be honest.
A lot of time in your hands.
A lot of time in your hands to
sit on your hands and have boring teams that can't score goals.
No, I think he would just develop the squad. I think he's very good with like limitations and probably players at a certain level too that he can get the most out of. I just never think Chelsea suited him.
World class players like
the status.
You know, all of those English world class players, would they be looking at him going, yeah, you did, oh wait a second now.
He's not.
As soon as you got the opportunity, you bombed out. Yeah, you were exactly what we need around the place in a World Cup quarter-final, semi-final, final.
Talking about the Irish side.
But no, he's not going to manage Ireland. Why do we want him? Let's try and develop some Irish coaches.
Absolutely.
It's an option. Have a system in place.
It's an option. That's all.
No, Stephen Bradley's next up, lads. We all know that. Come on. There's a queue here. Get in the queue.
Sure.
We'll move on. Also in the red, as I started at the top of the show incorrectly, was Liverpool. Objects thrown at the Liverpool bus.
Sorry, Liverpool and what, Shane?
Liverpool and Manchester United.
Yes, okay.
Holding hands,
locked
as I said,
together.
Locked together indefinitely. But Man City strongly condemning the objects being thrown at the Liverpool bus after the game. Inappropriate chants as well by fans during the game, taunting Liverpool fans throughout. I mean, when Salah scores the goal, you're thinking this is going to be a decent game, albeit it was against the run of play. But I mean, I think it was Jack Grealish that deserves the headlines here. John Stones was brilliant as well, but Grealish, the old cliched coming of age performance seems to be wheeled out every so often when Grealish has a decent performance because he's £100 million. These are the games that he should be playing well in. But
well, Grealish has been brilliant. The money
doesn't
matter.
Ages. 8 assists since the World Cup, Shane.
He's been brilliant.
Yeah,
that's a real backhanded compliment. Who do you support, Shane? Oh wait, it's Man United. Fairly obvious. I mean, come on, Grealish has been sensational.
Yeah, he's starting to be sensational.
Since the World Cup, he is in the context up there with Bukayo Saka as like most effective. Saka's a bit ahead of him, I would argue.
Definitely.
And then it's Grealish, and like he's never not in the team at the moment.
That's the problem though with Pep Guardiola, isn't it? You just don't know. You don't know what he's going to do with the team.
No, I do know. He's picking Grealish.
But he has
every
to pick
game.
Grealish, yeah, he has to.
I think he finally trusts him as well.
Yeah.
He's a very specific skill set, Grealish. He does almost all the time does the same thing with the ball. Gets up very, very wide left, like he's hugging the touchline. Everybody knows he's coming back in the right, but he has this ability to glide past challenges or else win free kicks. Basically, his shtick is he wins loads of free kicks, and defenders don't really know how to deal with him because he drifts in between the lines. But like you'd still want way more from him. Like you'd want more goals and assists, and he can do that. Like the goal he scored kind of capped off a great performance. He had this great little flick ball inside to Ilkay Gundogan from the left. I don't know if you saw that when he cut in his right and just chipped it over, I think 2 Liverpool players into the box for Gundogan to basically create another, I think nearly another goal chance as well. So he has that in him. He should do more.
When it was 1-0, he tracked back and was like absolutely sensational and stopped a goal.
Got out the Salah.
And
move.
They go down the pitch and score in the next movement, basically, and he's involved in that as well. It was like a 90-second window.
Crosses for Alvarez,
and it was an absolutely sensational injection of pace from him to get back and commitment and all the stuff that like everybody is this, you know, how can he do the hippie crack and the late night parties and then still be a great footballer? So, well, it turns out he's got quite the engine on him, and so it's been a sensational recovery from the position where he was like, oh, he's a flop, which all the Man United
it's the sign of a player with a lot of confidence because he believed that he was going to track Salah down. he believed he was going to catch him. And I think if he wasn't playing that well, or if he didn't feel like he had the belief of his manager in him, maybe he doesn't make that, because he feels if he's playing well now, I can do everything, like he was doing at Aston Villa.
If you're Liverpool, I don't know where you are. It's obviously Liverpool we're discussing in the red, but I mean, it's and this is a Man City without Erling Haaland, you have to remember as well, so that puts the whole game into context.
How did this Liverpool team beat that Man United team 7-0? How did Man United lose 7-0 to this Liverpool team?
It's remarkable, isn't it?
What the hell?
So Jonathan Wilson pointed out that Liverpool have scored a third of their goals in 2 games this season. The 9-0 against Bournemouth, 7-0 against Manchester United. For an out-of-sort season, they've had those 2 games. They look completely fatigued. Jurgen Klopp looks fed up with everything. They're a shadow of them for themselves, aren't they? They're
frustrating to watch, Liverpool. I think Liverpool fans at the moment are just like, this is difficult, because they threaten to be good every so often. Like Nunez and Gakpo are, I think we all agree, good signings now. Like they've shown enough glimpses this season, albeit it's a bad enough season for them so far. But Liverpool still can get top 4. And I mean, you look at the team, it's like a race to the bottom in the top 4 at the moment. Newcastle probably the best of them.
Yeah. Now, they were unlucky not to have Darwin Núñez from the start. He didn't play for Uruguay in the international break because of a deep cut I think he received, so he only came on, so you're missing him.
Yeah.
But I don't think their attack has been too problematic this season. It's the midfield, isn't it? And their full-backs look shattered. Like Andy Robertson came off, looked wrecked. When's the last time Robertson got a sustained break? Who's the backup for Alexander-Arnold at right back? Their defensive partnerships have never been solidified this season. Virgil van Dijk doesn't look the player he once was. But still up front, I think they're brilliant up front. Like that front 3 of Gakpo, Nunez and Salah has the potential to be the front 3 for the next couple of seasons.
Can I ask
but
you,
midfield is the problem.
Can I ask you without looking anything up here? So their front 3 has been excellent. Front 3 has potential to be excellent. Maybe not has been excellent. How many goals do you think they've scored in their 27 games? Would you say it is more or less than, say, Brighton?
I'd say you're asking it in a leading manner, so I'd say it's less.
And would you say it's more or less than Brentford?
Again, I'd say it's less.
Well, they're all very similar. Brighton have scored 49, Liverpool have scored 48, Brentford have scored 46. So, for all of the investments, and I know obviously chances are created by the midfield and the wingers, and I understand that they're all having shit seasons, so it's okay. But anyway, I understand that like it's a knock-on impact, but they're goal scoring. So Arsenal have 70, Manchester City have 71. What about Spurs? Have Spurs had a good season or a bad season?
Middling season, not a Spurs season.
And would you say Spurs have more or less goals than Liverpool this season in the league? Without looking it up, because these are the type of things that you kind of fall into a pattern.
It's like doing homework with your dad.
Less than Spurs.
Yeah. By much?
By a margin, I'd say 10 goals.
No, 3 goals.
All right.
They've had basically the same season.
Mm-hmm.
And their defence is actually like slightly better than Brentford. It's the same as Brighton, way better than Spurs.
Yeah, I mean, does this all go down to the problematic nature of giving your star player an extended contract and hoping that you're going to get even more out of him? I.e., was the time to sell Mo Salah last summer? Salah's still been brilliant this season. He's still scored a shed load of goals, but he just doesn't. He, as I said earlier, he looks a bit lonely without Sadio Mane up front, and he hasn't really connected with the other 2.
The creative tension.
Yeah, the creative tension.
Sure,
exactly. They're all a bit too nice to each other. Huh?
They'd be screwed this season without him.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, but I wonder at the same
somebody
time,
else would have scored those goals.
What's the future of Liverpool's attack? I think those front 3 at the moment they're fine, but they probably just need to connect more and play consistently together.
All right, let's talk about Man United though, because you've been avoiding this. You've been we can talk more about Liverpool and we'll get some of your comments. We are going to talk about Manchester United in a bit more detail with Daniel Harris in a few minutes, so we're not going to ruin everything here, but oh my God, what the hell's going on?
Luke Shaw's going to be a great pundit when he finishes.
He's an honest boy, isn't he?
He is honest.
Yeah, very honest. So the quote I have in front of me, I think they won it on passion, desire, hunger and attitude, 4 fairly important things. They clearly had higher motivation than we had, and that can't be possible. It's not acceptable. Higher motivation, why? Like, you're both going for top 4. Understandably, United are still in the FA Cup and the Europa League and whatever else. They're challenging them on a couple of fronts, but what does that mean, that Newcastle had higher motivation than we had? Like, they're at home. Is that what you mean? To James's Park? And again, I appreciate Luke Shaw's honesty. I think a lot of United fans would appreciate Luke Shaw's honesty as well.
Would you not prefer a better performance?
Well, of course.
I'm sorry, but like what? Go on. But you're all making. Oh, isn't it great that we have this really honest guys playing for us? Play some better football.
Would you prefer he came out with a statement, we'll try
I prefer
better?
to get some better football.
Yeah, of course.
He's got a new contract.
Of course. The gaping Casemiro-shaped hole in that midfield as well. Bruno
Oh,
Guimaraes.
we're now utterly reliant on one man. Is that what's going on?
No, but he's a fairly significant fulcrum.
You're right, Shane. Casemiro's missed 8 of the last 10 Manchester United games, and as Jonathan Wilson reported this morning, United are 2.5 times more likely to win the game when Casemiro plays. And having said that, the Brazilian crucial man he was in midfield in the 7-0 against Liverpool.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Do you know? I go back to Keane talking about was it the circus or was it the opera? I can't even remember what it was. Was it soap opera? What was he talking about in the aftermath of the cup? Is it just something bubbling up that he was unhappy about?
I can't remember.
Is that after the 7-0?
Yeah, I think so. It must have been.
Is there a bang of Wanda Ramos and we won the Carling Cup? We're off for the rest of the season. We've already qualified for Europe now. Deal's done. Sure, we can't finish. We can't qualify for the Champions League. Is that what's happening here?
No, they have to qualify for the Champions League. They have to attract players, and then financially as well. When you have new owners coming in, it's so crucial United get that top 4 place. I think this season more than any other recently. Den Hag was volatile yesterday. He had to be separated from Howe in the touchline in the second half. I think it was by Steve McLaren.
Is there a benefit to that? Is that like a good sign?
Well, I think when you're losing and you're performing as crap as United did yesterday.
Was that performative?
No, I don't think so. I don't think Erik ten Hag is a performative person. It's not in his demeanour usually. I just think the performance overall was brutal. I mean, they tried some different things, Lindelof being one of them. I just don't know. Where do you stick? It feels so far away from the Carabao Cup final performance against Newcastle.
I think you're right, Ger. I think the legacy problems of the last decade are still there, very, very present in this squad. And I think that the capitulation aspect it's always there in the background. And I think Erik ten Hag is probably shocked to see that it's still so prevalent. Like if you look at the last 3 games, no goals in the league. Because you'd forget, since the 7-0 against Liverpool, they've had 3 other games. The 2 legs against Betis, where they won handily, and then Fulham in the FA Cup. But the game in between was 0-0 at home to Southampton in the league. So they're kind of faltering at the point where people are saying, geez, they could mount a title challenge here. And it was a month ago, like the Sunday Times did this big piece on Casemiro and how he's changed the mentality at the club. And I think that triangle of he, Varane and Martinez is going to usher in the new era at United. But the legacy of the last few years is still very prevalent, and it's probably shocked a lot of people that it is so.
The thing I would say about United is that was the toughest fixture they have left in the Premier League, I would say, this season. Newcastle away. Like they've a couple of home games this week. They've Brentford at home on Wednesday night, and then Everton at home this Saturday in the early kick-off. Like, they have a reasonable fixture list.
Who has Ten Hag made up his mind about this summer? Who's he getting rid of?
Anthony?
No, Anthony's his boy.
I know.
Anthony's his boy. The one player who had a shot on target for United yesterday, Anthony, 56 minutes, trickled into the goalkeeper's hands.
And do you all agree that what's going on with that? Because you were giving out about Jack Grealish and all the money a few minutes ago, Shane. I haven't heard you once mention the fee for Anthony this morning.
100%.
What about Shane?
What about Anthony? Anthony has been... Look, then he comes up with those moments like Barcelona, like he scores the winner against Barcelona at Old Trafford. Like he just bangs in a worldie every so often.
Yeah, that's exactly what you want. 4 or 5 moments a year, nothing else. That's exactly what you paid.
No, I back Shane up there.
How much was he?
I back Shane. Yeah, look, this transfer fee every time.
Yeah,
Grealish is 100 million.
Harry Maguire 85.
Don't mind the transfer fees; they're all outrageous.
It was 95 million euro for Anthony.
Don't mind that.
82 million. That's not can't be right.
The club can afford it. It's fine. I think Anthony's isn't a problem.
No.
Versus other issues in the team.
Well, it's a little bit of a problem in that it's just that they're going to be hit and miss with their transfer dealings, and they can't afford any misses. And
I think yesterday's
presumably Varane was injured, right? That's why they took him off.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
And they took him on. They took Lisandro Martinez off at the same time, did they?
Yeah, I mean. The only acceptable performance yesterday, and I understand those decisions from tonight, the only acceptable performance was David De Gea, and that's not a good sign that your goalkeeper is the main man.
But that double save, the second one just hit him.
Yeah,
he was on the ground already, but he had to be there, I suppose.
He had to be there.
Right. Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah, we'll keep going into the amber. The Irish in Europe, the Champions Cup.
Leinster are in green and everybody else is in red. That's how this works.
Pretty much.
But we're just mixing the colours here because we don't really, for the sake of brevity.
Red and green make amber. Is that correct? I don't know.
A 50 burger in the European Cup That's what Munster gave up.
Yeah.
Quinny's in France. I don't know if you saw Aisling Riley's footage of
over on the ferry,
him
yeah.
and Raj meeting on the
beautiful.
pitch on her social. Anyway, we will come back to this a little bit later on. Munster were shocking. Like,
not a great performance.
talk about legacy issues and chickens coming home to roost. That was shocking from Munster, but also not shocking in any way, because we've seen this frail defence. Oh, where's your argument now, Colin, about all the lack of Munster players playing for Ireland?
But it's still there.
Share me your buddy's anger. Share me the righteous anger that your buddies have in the pub in Cork about the Ireland team winning the Grand Slam, not having enough
I'll do
Munster
that off
players.
there. But I would say it would have been nice. I still can't argue for it, and this definitely doesn't help matters. Well, look, one issue on the side. It's 29 degrees, 83% humidity. Munster look absolutely knackered. Did you see them coming out in the second half? I mean, Peter O'Mahony looked exhausted, and he was leading the line. They still notched up 35 points, but the ship 50, and 50 was being generous in the end. Cian Tracey is going to go big on this later on.
Okay, so we'll come back to that a little bit later on,
Yeah,
but
rightly come
not
back to
good.
the rugby.
And Ulster got a bit of a free pass. They're like, oh, we didn't expect them, and they did a little bit better than expected. But I don't know.
Yeah, Cian wants to talk about Ulster too, and they're...
I think you need a free pass when you're playing Leinster.
I think you got to stop giving yourselves free passes.
I know, but
otherwise, you end up always having mediocrity as your bar.
They're a machine, though. This Leinster team are a machine.
Leinster weren't playing well at all.
No, I know, that's the problem.
A few key players missing as well. It was a little window of opportunity for Ulster.
Somewhat.
I thought, in fairness, Stockdale, there is depth there now. He's getting back to some level of form close to what we thought Jacob Stockdale was capable of. Whereas if Mac Hansen was going to be injured or out later on in the year, you'd be very concerned. Now, all of a sudden, I think there is genuine strength and depth there. But
He looked like a player with a point to prove, Stockdale. Big time.
Yeah, and he's still I think he's 27, so still plenty of time for him to reassert himself as somebody that has the support of the Irish selectors. Anyway, so that's in the amber. We're going to move on to green.
Yeah, we'll come back to the rugby later on, as you said, with Cian Tracey. The league winners, the Allianz National Football League's coming to their conclusion over the weekend. Sligo, Cavan, Dublin, Mayo, the league champions for 2023. I was in Croke Park yesterday. Good atmosphere, good vibe. The two games probably disappointed somewhat. I was heading to Croke Park thinking this is going to be a really exciting day of football. Two really tight games, really interesting games. And in the first half of Dublin Derry, you're thinking, yep, this is going to script. But then Dublin, of course, started raising the green flags for fun in the second half. And Cluxton, of course, sat on the bench and didn't enter the fray at any stage. And then Mayo, Pádraig Joyce kind of almost, it wasn't an excuse after the game, but he was kind of saying they're probably further along in their prep, given that they play Championship next week, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at the whole thing. Killian McDade was a bit of an absence in that Galway team, I'd have to say. And when Mayo started so brightly and Galway pegged them back, you're thinking this is kind of the way you expect the game to go. You expected a response from Mayo maybe after the Monaghan game the previous week, albeit a raft of changes. Colin Marit, the goalkeeper, was brilliant.
Some save at the end, wasn't it?
Oh,
I know it was above his head, but the reflexes.
From the boot and from shot stopping, he was excellent. And I think there has been a lot of debate in Mayo as to who the keeper should be. They each have their pros and cons, but Reeves has now shown that he has to start against Roscommon next week, and there can be no argument. He probably should have had a black card, possibly, for the Johnny Heaney tackle. Only got a yellow. I think lucky enough to only get a yellow in that one as well. 10 of Mayo's 14 points came from frees and marks. That's one thing I would say. There wasn't a lot of scoring from play. There wasn't
marks count. Marks count.
They do, of course they
count.
count.
From play,
yeah. Obviously they ruin the flow of the game. You can get a very handy mark, but it'll certainly be something that Kevin McStay is thinking about. It's funny, it's a different atmosphere to the Mayo League win in 2019. 2019 was like a watershed moment, national title, first one in a while. This is brilliant. Whereas yesterday felt like, okay, and it's probably because of proximity to the championship, isn't it, that they can't really celebrate this one.
The front of the actual Irish Times this morning has a picture of Aidan O'Shea looking up to the heavens at the full-time whistle. So obviously it did mean something to them. It wasn't nothing.
Galway couldn't get level. 8 points to 5 down at the break. I think they got back to within a point again in the second half, but they just couldn't get that score to bring them level, which I think psychologically would have been fairly significant. I wouldn't be too concerned if I was a Galway fan. Not at all. They're waiting in the quote-unquote long grass for whoever wins that Mayo or
and sure, look, none of these matches matter until, despite what everybody in Ulster will have you believe. Rory Gallagher is saying the Ulster Football Championship is a great structure. It's not. It just isn't. It just isn't. It makes no sense.
Not anymore.
It's actually punishing the good teams in Ulster by making them all beat the shit out of each other and then getting all the way through to a round robin stage and arriving absolutely shattered from the process. It makes no sense. And you all voted for it and you're all going to suffer as a result of it. There should be an Ulster winner of the All-Ireland this year. We should be heavily leaning towards it, given that there are so many strong teams up there and you're all going to kill each other.
Well,
and then all of a sudden arriving out and then you'll get picked off by teams who are inferior. That's my prediction.
Yeah, well, see the Tyrone Monaghan match in Omagh in the Ulster quarter-final. In a normal year, I would be looking at that game with such nerves, and now I'm like, I couldn't care less. If Monaghan lose that game, I couldn't care less. Honestly. Because it's all about the group stages, as you say.
What's the last screen?
The last screen, we're moving on to Arsenal and City. We've kind of touched on City and Grealish and that performance, generally speaking. But Arsenal, a team that we often get criticised for not covering maybe as well as we should. And again, that game seems like ages ago. But the 4-1 win against Leeds, Gabriel Jesus' return has really been cemented now. I mean, this title race...
Are they going to win the league?
They should from here, right? You'd make them... Like, you would say that they have everything they need. They've no distractions. They've got a really strong level of depth, it appears. They've survived their best and most important striker being out for 2.5 months.
Yeah.
So it's theirs to lose.
Winning run of 7 games now. It's whoever blinks first at this stage. I'd love a title race where neither of them blink. They just keep going full speed ahead until the end of the season. It doesn't happen that way ever. Someone will blink. So it's just a matter of who. At least Arsenal have that leeway where they can maybe drop a few points. But it's going to be some.
Why does it feel to me that Pep Guardiola is still going to be the manager lifting the trophy at the end of the season?
Because
he always is, yeah.
You've been conditioned to see it. Past performance is no indicator of... Anyway, right.
Okay.
That is this week's episode of the Gillette Labs Performance Rankings.
OTB AM's Performance Rankings with Gillette.
Braeburn Coffee is the official coffee partner of Off the Ball. Braeburn Coffee is coming to an Applegreen near you. New Braeburn locations are popping up every month, so visit applegreenstores.com to find your nearest Braeburn coffee experience. Up next, Daniel Harris, but first here's some Kenny Cunningham goodness on Newcastle's 2-0 win against Manchester United.
Should be in the top 4, you think, at the end of the season?
Shoulda, coulda, woulda. I don't know. I think, like I said, it's been a bad last couple of weeks. They're still right in the mix, don't get me wrong. Never quite bought into they can win the title. Probably about a month ago. They were never good enough to do that, potentially challenge Arsenal or Manchester City. Realistically, it was all about Champions League football, the position that they've put themselves in. But this is the business end of the season now. They've done great to get themselves to this point, but they've had a wobble the last couple of weeks. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, underlying issues maybe. Lack of Casemiro for the last couple of games. They need to get him back. Does he strengthen that area of the pitch? Yes, of course he does. So another challenge for the manager and his players now. Off the back of the horrendous start which they had to the season, pulled it together, went on an unbelievable run. Now they've had another wobble, and teams are putting a run together. Newcastle in particular, Tottenham just might Conte leaving the football club might just spark something at Tottenham. They might find a little bit between now and the end of the season. So Manchester United are going to have to match that for me. They're not going to tip their toe their way potentially into a Champions League qualification spot. They're going to have to grab it, and to grab it, they're going to have to find some consecutive wins between now and the end of the season. Looked a little bit out of sorts today, a little bit disjointed. You could mention Casemiro out of the team. That's a little bit too simple. Just thought they looked a little bit out of sync today, a little bit open, particularly in that kind of central midfield area. Substitutes really did make an impact. Spoke about Ten Hag this season. Substitutions coming on, impact in the game. Great in-game management. Didn't really happen for them today. So, yeah, that'd be a little bit demoralising result for them today. Chins will be on the floor a little bit from those players. Haven't seen too much of that the past couple of months from Manchester United players. So, yeah, the manager needs a reaction. He needs to find a couple of solutions as well. Because, like I said, business end of the season now. And United need to find a little bit of form and match the kind of performances and the results of the teams around them, Newcastle in particular.
OTB AM,
the Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball.
Glad to see the goalkeepers getting the benefit of the doubt.
They always get the benefit of the doubt.
That's not true. That is not true. I feel like the referees get together and have a meeting, right? I honestly think this happens. And in those meetings, they either have, okay, I want you to be quite lenient. I want you to give the goalkeepers the benefit of the doubt. I want you to punish, blah, blah, blah. Because it just seems to be a little trend that goes on.
Keep up to date with all the WSL action every Tuesday and subscribe to the feed in the OTB Sports app now. OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.
Right, as you were hearing there from Kenny Cunningham, it was a 2-0 victory for Newcastle against Manchester United. We had the game live on Off the Ball on Newstalk yesterday, and it leaves Manchester United in a very interesting situation where obviously there's still cup glory to be won and there is still a place in the top 4 to be won. Daniel Harris joins us now to reflect on the game yesterday and where they are generally. What did you make of the performance? What was behind it?
I think it was the culmination of a few factors that we've seen kind of maturing over the last few weeks. United are the busiest team in world football. The players look like they're a bit tired now, and they're not able to rotate in quite the same way as some of the teams above us, Manchester City in particular, just because they don't have as many good players. Also, it's been the case over the season. I've been on here before saying when Casemiro doesn't play, they aren't good. And the main thing that I've felt has been holding them back the last couple of years has been not having a proper player in Casemiro's position. So when he isn't there, the drop-off to the player who comes in to replace him is colossal. And that also makes a massive difference. But it also just looks like physically and mentally they're spent a little bit. So they weren't able to produce the same level of intensity that Newcastle were.
Obviously, it's difficult to recover that intensity now when over the next 2 months they have quarterfinals of the Europa League, semi-final of the FA Cup, and all of the games in the Premier League that are later this season than they would have been in previous years because of the World Cup. So is there a prospect of them finishing well outside the top 4, or are they going to be able to dig in? Because the fixture list is on paper relatively kind, but then you remember half these teams are fighting for relegation, and so all of a sudden aren't going to be rolling over the way that maybe in previous years at this time of the year fixtures were a bit more of a gimme.
Well, the record against teams that aren't that good is actually not bad at all. That United's home record is excellent. The problem really has been away games against good teams, and they don't have too many of those to come. I guess I don't think that they'll drop out the top 4, partly because I don't think the teams that they're competing with are good enough to put in the kind of run that it's going to take to overtake them. It does mean that the game on Wednesday at home to Brentford feels like a really important game, because if they can't rebound from a difficult game against Newcastle, and you could go to Newcastle, play well and still lose because Newcastle are a good team. So that result is, the manner of it wasn't great, but it is you can sometimes lose those games. But if they're unable to get a result against Brentford at home, then you start to look like they really do have a problem. But it doesn't look like Tottenham are going to put together the kind of run that will get them in 4th, because even last season when they did it, they only really did it because of the incompetence of United and Arsenal as well. It wasn't a championship-winning run that they put together. They won just about enough games to make it happen. And it doesn't look like they're going to put anything together. Liverpool have been completely unreliable all season, and they're quite a long way behind now. So there's no reason, again, to think that Liverpool are going to just going to suddenly go and win every game between now and the end of the season. And it is going to take Liverpool winning almost every game. So I think they'll be okay for top 4, but we can see that they're flagging.
We've already mentioned the Luke Shaw quotes, Daniel, from yesterday at the top of the show, but for anyone just tuning in, I think they won it on passion, desire, hunger and attitude. They're talking about Newcastle. They clearly had higher motivation than we had, and that can't be possible. It's not acceptable. I think Luke Shaw referenced himself, the fact that he seems to have to say the same thing every time United have a performance like this, but that line about Newcastle having higher motivation, it's concerning, I think, for United fans to hear the likes of that.
I think that we, as football supporters, we think if I played, I would just give 100% in every game, and it's easy to turn up and play with incredible intensity every time. And it isn't. The reason why the teams that win, one of the reasons is because they have the players that are able to do that. And it isn't easy to do that. But I guess coming off international break, I think one of the differences I thought was when Eddie Howe made that kind of quite strange victory speech in the dressing room that they decided to show on Sky yesterday. One of the things he said was, this is a reward for the 2 weeks of hard work we've done. And for United, it wasn't like that, because most of United's players were away with their countries. So Newcastle had 2 weeks to prepare for that game because most of their players weren't away and United hadn't. And it felt like it showed that Newcastle were primed and ready to go, and United had been travelling the world. And I think it does, obviously, you never want to hear a player saying, well, they tried harder than us. But I think we underestimate how hard it is to put in that requisite level of intensity every day. So it isn't, no one wants to see it, but I guess there is also a pattern of these players saying it every time they get beaten. There'll be that kind of hangdog sullen-faced interview where they apologise and say that it wasn't good enough and would be working really hard to put it right next week. But on the whole, United they're quite a long way ahead, I think, of where I thought they'd be this season. They've won a trophy. They're in the running for 2 more, and they're in the running for top 4. So it does look like they're going in the right direction. And if you have a look at the team, so Mikel Arteta wanted a player in the summer in the transfer window. He was going to get Mudryk until he got outbid by Chelsea. Then he got Jorginho and Trossard. United got Wout Weghorst and Sabitzer. So they didn't back the manager in the way that the manager needed backing, which made some kind of sense in that if the players that you want aren't available, then just take what you can get on loan. But they've sort of hit their ceiling. This is where they are as a team, I think, at the moment. They're probably, I think, the 3rd best team in the league. They're good enough to beat any team on a good day, but they can also produce some absolute nonsense. And the next level is raising the bottom level of the team, I think, which the next couple of players will help do. They've got a centre forward that's better than Wout Weghorst, for example. I think you'll see a very significant improvement in that team. And I mentioned earlier they were missing Casemiro, but they're also missing Christian Eriksen, who gives them some kind of midfield composure and control. And then you're down to Sabitzer, who's hardly played for United, and Scott McTominay, who aren't as good as the players that they've replaced.
Well, Wout Weghorst, is that experiment finished now? Anthony Martial replacing him after an hour. He's clearly a better footballer than Wout Weghorst. Is the whole thing finished now? Is this the last we'll see, essentially, of Wout Weghorst in this United team?
Never underestimate Anthony Martial's ability to do something that means he can't play for United. So, I mean, I hope so, because even when Martial came on, there was just a few moments where you could see the difference. Where I think there was a counter, United get the ball in their own half, and Martial carries it forwards, and all of a sudden you've got an attack. And he's better, I would say, at almost everything than Weghorst, apart probably maybe Weghorst is better at pressing, but there's no reason why Martial shouldn't be good at pressing because he's faster. So he should be able to press if he does what he's told. So if Martial is fit and can stay fit to the rest of the season, that will make a colossal difference. I mean, no one ever wants to be the person that says Anthony Martial will bring freshness and energy to any kind of football team. But a fit Anthony Martial is a really good player. So hopefully that will give United the opportunity to someone to play off, because Weghorst, he doesn't hold the ball up that well. He's not that good in the air for someone of that height either. But Martial looks a lot like what Ten Hag's idea of a centre forward looks like, in that he's got some pace, he can come off and hold it up, he can finish, he can run with the ball. The question with Martial is, can he find the intensity that you need to bring it every game, and can he stay fit? And if he is able to stay fit, then there isn't that long to go. And he also really is playing for his future at United, because United are going to sign a striker in the summer, and he's vulnerable because they need to generate money and they're going to sign someone to go in front of him. So there's a challenge for him there, and he either meets that challenge or he doesn't. But even his sort of 60% of Anthony Martial is probably a better player than 100% of Wout Weghorst.
One of the reasons why they didn't back the manager in the last transfer window is because they'd obviously spent all of their money in the summer. We talked a bit about so Casemiro, obviously, I think everybody would agree he's been a good signing. Martinez, I think you would largely say has been a good signing as well. The amount of money that they spent on Anthony, I mean, they might have been able to spend, if they hadn't signed him, they would have been able to buy Trossard, for example, or somebody like that in the January window. So there is while the money doesn't really matter, it does matter in terms of them not having available funds. No transfer system is flawless. For a period of time, Liverpool's was perfect, and then that fell away, and you can see how important the quality of recruitment is. So what needs to happen next when it comes to recruitment? Does Ten Hag need more people helping him to make decisions so that they don't overpay for players and that they're a bit more sensible about whatever the budget is in the summer?
I don't think so. I mean, he went for players that he knew, which does ring some alarm bells. But at the same time, because United were where they were, it felt like the players that Ten Hag knew were probably the best players that they could get, because they wanted not just to come to United for United, they wanted to come and be managed by him. And it was just his personal pull as well as the pull of United. But I think with Anthony, I thought Anthony played quite well yesterday, and they didn't get him enough of the ball because he had the beating of Dan Burn. And I was surprised that he got taken off when he did. Ten Hag knows Anthony well, and so we either think that he understands more about what Anthony's ceiling is than we do or not. I mean, it doesn't mean he can't make mistakes, but he obviously feels that Anthony has what it takes to succeed at United. And I quite like what I've seen of Anthony. He hasn't torn it up, but he scored some important goals coming to a new league, having not really had a pre-season, moving countries and having an injury in a World Cup in the middle of it.
Sure, but I suppose my point is that there is a cost in overpaying that, like, in the long run, the transfer doesn't matter. The transfer fee doesn't matter to a club of Manchester United's size, except in January you leave yourself short because you've spent all your money.
But let's say they bought a different player to Anthony, let's say for £50 million. Would the right player that they wanted, whether the midfield player or the striker, have been available for the difference between what they could have spent on somebody different and what they got for Anthony? I think one of the things I've learned watching football is that you should buy the players that you want. You do sometimes end up buying a player that you didn't want and it works really well. I mean, Trossard wasn't Arsenal's first choice, but Mudryk went to Chelsea, so they bought him, and it seems to be working well currently. But Arsenal in a different position. Arsenal were looking for a finishing touch. They were looking for a rotation player, of someone to just give them that push to get over the line right now. United are looking to build a team that's going to be good next season, the season after, whereas Arsenal sort of already had that. So I don't think that the money, that difference between what they could have paid and what they did pay and what they couldn't then spend in the winter made a particularly significant difference. Because one thing I've learned is that any footballer, any transfer that works is worth every penny you're lucky enough to pay for it, because lots of transfers don't work. So I don't think that overpaying for Anthony, and I mean, we're all agreed that they did overpay for Anthony, but I don't think that overpaying for Anthony massively cost them, because it wouldn't have meant that the player that they wanted in this last winter window would necessarily have been available for the difference between what they spent and what they could have spent.
I suppose we'll never know. We don't have access to the list of players. I don't think it's fair to say that the club didn't back the manager to sign players.
I didn't say that.
In winter, when clearly they spent all the money in the summer, and that's why they ended up with Weghorst and Sabitzer, though. So
no, but
the market that you're shopping in when you don't have any money is different from the market you shop in when you do have money.
Yeah, of course. But the reason why they didn't back him isn't because they spent all the money. I mean, whose money is it? They spent all the money that the Glazers were prepared to allow United to have, rather than spend it paying off their debts and paying off their dividends. It's not that Ten Hag has spent everything that's in the bank. It's that what they're allowing him to spend is different.
The budget. But everybody has a budget. Like even Chelsea had a budget at some point.
Right, but look what Chelsea did. They just went and spent what they didn't necessarily spend it wisely, but they spend the money that they need. When City buy a player and the player doesn't work, they just cycle through another. How many centre-backs and full-backs and goalkeepers Pep Guardiola buy? Because there isn't really a budget. I mean, of course you can't just go and buy every player in the world, but ultimately they are spending whatever's necessary. And I think one of the reasons United also couldn't spend in the winter was because why would the Glazers, looking like they're going to sell, why would they want to go and spend more money at this point when they're looking to sell the club? So I don't think I'm not blaming Ten Hag for the fact that there wasn't money available for him to spend. That's what the Glazers do. They'll allow some money, but it has felt like all the way through with the Glazers, you're always chasing. Even this is the case even under Fergie. If you think that United bought Owen Hargreaves in the summer of 2007, they didn't buy a midfield player until Nick Powell arrived in the summer of 2012. That's not because Fergie doesn't like midfield players. It's because there's stringent budget controls, and the Glazers aren't interested in winning as much as they're interested in dividends and debt repayments. So I didn't lose yesterday necessarily because of the Glazers. But if we're talking about transfer strategy, United's transfer strategy is dominated and determined by what the Glazers want to do with United's money and how much of it they want to take at that particular juncture.
But at the same time, that does absolve Ten Hag of any responsibility for spending 95 million on Anthony when the market was probably less than that. But they found themselves in such a situation where they'd obsessed about it. They'd publicly linked themselves with him to the point where it was Anthony or bust. And you can't say that Anthony's been a massive success. And I guess what I'm saying is that if Ten Hag makes similar signings in the future where they're not an immediate success, the period at which it's going to take Manchester United to be proper title contenders is going to be extended.
Right, but let's look at the players he bought. He bought Tyrone Malacia, 15 million quid. It's been good. He bought Martinez, who's been brilliant. He bought Casemiro, who's been brilliant. and he's bought Anthony, who I think is good. And Anthony wasn't bought just for this season, so it's pointless saying, well, in the 8 months that he's played for United, the 30 games or whatever it is he's played for United, he scored, 8 goals or something, 5 assists? That's not bad. I don't think that. Do you think those are bad numbers? He scored against Arsenal, scored an important goal against Everton, he scored the goal against Barcelona, he scored against Betis. So he hasn't destroyed the league. But he's 23, 24. I think he just turned 24. If you look at other good players, what was Sadio Mane doing at that age? What was Mohamed Salah doing at that age? He's at the right age to improve quickly as the team improves around him. He'll also look a lot better if he can get a good right back. If he had a right back of Luke Shaw's quality on his side, he would also look a lot better. I don't look at Anthony and think, why did you spend this money on this player? I look at him and I see a good player with potential. And I also see a manager who signed 3 other excellent players. So I don't feel that I'm mistrustful of him because he decided that Anthony was the right winger that he had to have. So they overspent by £20 million on him because ultimately those are numbers. The player's either good or he isn't.
Sure,
and
they are numbers.
I'm saying that 20 million quid. That 20 million quid is not the difference between where United are now and United being very much better off than they are.
They could have signed a right back for that, though. That's the point. There's an opportunity cost when you overpay, and Manchester United are still paying a tax, and that tax is a cost. I would argue from the mismanagement of the previous decade. But we're getting stuck on Anthony. What about the rest of the next 4 or 5 weeks? You talked about the squad not being strong enough to have the same rotation as Manchester City. They're obviously going to need to rest players. Casemiro has automatically been rested for the last few weeks. Is the hope that...
And the rest. He's had half the winter off, that guy.
Is the hope then that it's going to be him versus the rest of the Premier League for the rest of the season, and that might just be enough because he's that good?
Well, it's not just that he's that good, it's just the balance that he gives the team, having someone in that position that the team has lacked for so long. And it just makes the fact that it's him is obviously very helpful. But if it was someone else as well, it would also make a difference because just someone who knows how to play that position helps you dictate the game. And if you suddenly have Varane, Martinez, Casemiro, that little triangle, that gives you a good opportunity to be strong in the middle of the pitch, so forcing your opponents wide when they attack and helping you dominate the middle of the pitch. Christian Eriksen's on the way back, as with Anthony Martial's coming back, and all of a sudden you've got a spine that enables the rest of the team to function. Bruno Fernandes obviously massively overplayed. He's the busiest. I saw a statistic yesterday that he's the busiest player in world football. I'm surprised he hasn't had a little bit more time off. It's probably at the point now where he's not getting any, but once you have those Casemiro and Eriksen back, it gives you just a bit more variety and control of the midfield because those are your playmakers. Casemiro also scores goals. United haven't had that over the last couple of games, and they've got to somehow get through the next 2 games without Casemiro, by which point Eriksen probably be quite close to coming back as well. So I would be surprised if United managed to botch the top 4 from here. The cup competitions, who knows? Brighton's a really hard game anyway, and you can lose a one-off game to anyone. And they are probably the best team left in the Europa League. They could win that. They should beat Sevilla. Sevilla aren't very good. Just fired their manager. But again,
that transforms the season if they manage to win that, because obviously everything that it brings with it, and it to be the perfect end to the year. I do just need to ask you about Marcus Rashford before we wrap up here. His form was so amazing that it was carrying the team along for a period of time in terms of the goals that he was scoring in narrow victories. And as it's come off a slight bit over the last couple of weeks, the team have been largely unable to score. So as goes Casemiro, as goes United, but equally as goes Rashford. Are you any concerns about him?
I think part of it is the absence of Casemiro and Eriksen means that he's getting less good possession. That if all of a sudden your midfield's Fred, McTominay, Sabitzer or whoever, you're not going to be able to dominate the ball in the same way. So I don't think I'm particularly worried about Rashford in that he's not Ronaldo. He's an excellent player, but he's not going to score in all the games. You have to be ready for him to go a few games without goal. And United are now 3 league games without goal. But once he starts getting a bit more service from midfield, then I think we'll see that he's able to start scoring again. But he was poor yesterday.
Is he world class? Is he world class, Daniel? We had that discussion on the show last week. Is
Marcus Rashford world class? I mean, we're going to need to define our terms here. Are we saying world class is what? If there was a team, or if there was a squad of players to take on the Martians, the players that play in that squad are world class, or are we saying the best 5 players in the world are world class. What do we mean by that?
Like I'm probably thinking, if you're the best, top 10 in a position in the world, then you're world class. But I guess everyone has their own.
That's a lot of world class lads.
I was on 20 last week. I've rolled back.
So there's 110 world class players in the world. That sounds like a lot. But I would say, if we're saying top 10, then yeah, I think he's in the top 10. But we need to see more of it, because he's been brilliant for 7 months or 8 months or whatever. But for me to say, well, you're one of the best players in the world, you need to do it over a stretch rather than you're someone who's been one of the best players in the world for the last 4 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, all right. We got to leave it there. Daniel, good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Have a good day, everyone.
That's Daniel Harris giving us his thoughts on the situation at Man United there. OTB AM live with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night edition available now. Ultimate Monday misery morning in OTB with Liverpool, United and Munster losing, says Powell74. You're obviously not a Liverpool and Man United fan.
Half and half, sure.
Powell74, so fair play to you. Do you still think Rashford is world class and worth the 500 grand a week? You're gas men, to be fair, says Tommy. I think that I think that
it's worth that money, for sure. The money is irrelevant to football fans. It doesn't make sense. It's monopoly money
to the fans. But to my point about spending all the money on Anthony, it means that you don't have money to sign other players. And then when you say the club didn't back the manager, it's like, well, they did back the manager. They gave him everything he wanted. They put all their chips into the middle for Anthony, and it hasn't worked.
The problem is Manchester United. United would have paid 20 million over the odds for Anthony anyway, because United's transfer fees are put up because they're Manchester United.
But that's a bit thick, isn't it?
Well, they have to overpay for players.
Well, they
have no choice.
They don't. You have a choice not to. Your scouting could be better, so you could get the players before they're actually already at the stage where they're overpriced. You can shop in different markets.
Sometimes, but there's some players where you just want to buy a player desperately. The manager has an obsession over a player and needs to buy them. And
that doesn't make any sense. So I think that...
Why doesn't it?
Look, I think Ten Hag, because they wasted all the money on Anthony.
But Anthony's not a waste yet, is he? Well, are you ruling Anthony out of being good ever in his Manchester United career?
No, but that's not the point. The point is that they had no money to sign anybody at Christmas when they really needed to freshen the squad, because they'd spent all the money on Anthony. So there's a cost to the money that isn't just a cost; it's an opportunity cost.
Yeah.
If they're weak at right back, I mean, did they not sign Malaysia for that?
Well, he's more of a left back,
anyway.
Possibly.
Okay.
But I'd wonder, are United just a couple of signings away from being contenders? Like, is it just a striker and a right back? The rest of the squad looks fairly decent on paper, but then again, there's performances like yesterday, so they will shape up in those two positions in the summer. They'll obviously, as Daniel said, buy a striker, and they will buy a right back. So I'd be fascinated to see if that improves the team. But there's a lot of holes. Yeah, it's a concern yesterday, I think. So Ten Hag didn't look a happy man, and rightly so.
Come on, Ger, you're Mr. OTB AM, and no Villa, Emery in the green. Have a word with that Cork fella, says Chris Cal. You should be tuned in to the football kickoff every Friday at 11, Chris Cal. But I mean, Emery, he got game, what?
Oh, what a manager. I mean, yeah, it's a missed opportunity. I'd say the likes of Spurs are looking at that going,
There was an excellent point that Phil made on Friday when he was talking about Unai Emery's time at Arsenal and how they'd get into winning positions and then he'd make conservative substitutions, and that didn't really... Now, did they qualify for the Champions League every year? Did he manage to... So in retrospect, was he actually a bit of a success at Arsenal, but just that their standards were still... They were remembering peak Wenger. I don't know. I'd need to go back and look at his time at Arsenal. But it was interesting yesterday when he had the opportunity. He brought on Leon Bailey for Emi Buendia instead of just bringing on another centre-back or another defensive midfielder. So it looks like he still has... He's learning. That's what you want. That's all you want.
He's an exciting manager. I was at Villa Park for his first game and I was just thinking, there's a buzz about this man.
Yeah.
There's just something different about him. I like Unai Emery. So yeah, I think Villa fans this morning waking up. Maybe they should have been in the green, but look.
JP Wright says Newcastle have been fantastic this season. The squad was put together in a fraction of Man United's. Credit for Eddie Howe, please. I mean, could they have signed... Couldn't they have signed the good right back that if they're desperate for a right back, wasn't that available to them for a long period of time, but they decided not to go down the Trippier route?
Yeah. I mean, Newcastle were in relegation trouble last season and now all of a sudden they're challenging for top four. Turns out money works.
But also
Eddie Howe, yeah. Credit where credit is due.
Yeah, because didn't Man United spend more than them in the summer? Didn't they?
Sure. Don't let facts get in the way of it.
8:34 this morning here on OTB AM. Let's turn our attention to rugby. Alison Miller is with us to talk to us about the absolute hammering that France handed out. A 14-player France side against Ireland in Musgrave Park. Alison, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, guys. How are you?
That was a difficult watch on Saturday, as it didn't really look competitive at any level for any section of the game.
No, unfortunately not. I think there's a massive gulf between those two teams, and that was evident watching the game. Especially, we saw the card and thought that would be good for Ireland, but unfortunately we weren't able to take those opportunities presented by having an extra woman,
So a lot's being spoken about the team at the moment in terms of the age profile and the decade-long lack of investment in it. So it always seems like a pie of responsibility. Some of the responsibility is absolutely with the players who are there at the moment, but if those players haven't been acclimatised to international rugby, then the questions are, why have they not been acclimatised over a long period of time? Why is the age profile the way it is? Why is the experience profile the way it is? And that's a fundamental question that we have to ask, really, of the IRFU. It seems from the outside.
Yeah, I suppose there's a systemic failures probably since, I would say, with our last success was 2015, and obviously the 2017 World Cup that I played in was a failure in terms of performance, and I think probably from around 2016 onwards we kind of the team started to perform a little bit less effectively every year, and that kind of pushed on to where we are now. The IRFU now are putting a lot of work and a lot of effort in, but unfortunately it's happened too late, so we are where we are now. The players that are playing at the weekend, they're very young, they're very inexperienced, majority of them, and that's going to take time for them to get used to that international level and be exposed to that physicality of the international game, because if you look at that French team, the French league is very strong, as is the English league. The AL isn't where it needs to be, so it's about what can, I suppose, the management do to bridge that gap to get the intensity that those other teams play at week in, week out, in the lead up to any given year. How do you kind of maybe bring that intensity to the girls that are full-time in the high-performance centre? Because you got to try and match what's going on. Can you bring that into your camps? I suppose probably maybe where things were lost from 2013, 14, 15, they were the really good years. And I think the RFU had an opportunity to really build the game on the back of that success. Really, really get girls playing, use that success to build a game and be ambitious about it. And that didn't happen. All the focus was put into sevens. And I love the sevens game. And when I speak about that, I was a sevens player as well as a 15s player. Spent all day yesterday watching the World Series. So it's not like I'm not a fan of it, but it's a bit like having two kids and you put all your attention and all your focus on one child and you completely ignore the other. The other is going to flourish. And that's as simple as that. And that's not saying that the sevens shouldn't have got that attention. I just think when you favour one and ignore the other, that is going to happen, unfortunately. And look, I and loads of people, we want to see the sevens team qualify for the Olympics, and they're in a really good position to do that. And it's not, and I 100%, it's not saying that the sevens team, which I was part of, and I saw how well resourced and well looked after we were. It's not saying that shouldn't have happened. It's just saying that you got to resource for both, in the same way, which didn't happen. I was a member of both teams, so. And look, there's no doubt if we had some of the sevens girls Saturday, it would have made a difference, but it's not going to solve the problem. So that's being realistic too,
You've probably answered this question, Alison, in saying that. It struck me both on Saturday and the previous week against Wales as well. The team are missing a certain type of player. They don't really have ball carriers. You look at the French team and they're packed full of them. Is that just because our best ball carriers are with the sevens, or is that a deeper problem?
Well, they're two very different games, and let's not say that like our sevens players are going to be backs. And yes, like if you have Amy Lee Murphy-Crowe and Bevan Parsons that are able to beat people and, you know, have a playmaker like Stacey Flood and Eve Higgins, like they are very, very good players. But you're also looking at, you need big ball carriers like Sophie Spence was in the day, like the players like Sam Monaghan there and different things like that. But two different games, and like I suppose it's also things like the nuances of the front five that or even the pack that are very, very important as well, that I would have no idea about. I've been playing rugby all my life, and like my husband was a hooker, so like I listened to him talking about the intricacies of scrums and, you know, that tight play and different things like that, you know, like me as a back, I won't have an iota of what goes on. And so look, yes, they're like in the back line, but that's not going to solve the problem, especially when you're coming up against very, very physical French players from the front row to the back row. Like, so it would solve some of the problems, but it's definitely not going to, like, you know, make our team a Grand Slam team overnight. That's not going to happen, unfortunately.
Is there a sense that there's a group of players who are not being picked or not involved in the squad who would immediately be more experienced and more used to the vagaries of it? Or is that narrative wrong? What's your instinct about that? Because we're certainly hearing that there's a core group of players who are kind of in their peak years now, who are seasoned and more experienced and would be better capable of implementing a game plan just by virtue of the fact that they have an extra 10, 15 caps or an extra 3 or 4 years of experience, that these players who it feels could end up being brutalised by the experience of playing for Ireland now as opposed to actually enjoying it.
Well, look, I hope, like, you know, it's a very difficult time now at the moment for, you know, Nicola Friday and the captain. And like someone asked me the other day, like, did you ever have those massive defeats? And like, I was lucky that I came in 2010 and I never had massive defeats like that. We had defeats, but I'm just thinking of my first year, we lost to France 19-9, you know, close enough game. 2012, we got defeated, but it wasn't by massive scorelines like that. But if you think back to the players I played with, like Lynn Cantwell, Fiona Coughlin, Joy Neville, like even Grace David, like they shipped massive losses, and they'll tell you that themselves, and they stuck with it and just kept their head down and stuck with it. So like, you just hope. The thing now is there's more media attention on that, so like every massive loss is highlighted, so you're just hoping that the girls now will just stick to it and don't get disillusioned. And look, the media hype has completely, which is like great, but it's also more difficult for players when you're getting those losses. But to answer your question, like I kind of had a look at, like, from 2016 on, there's been massive chopping and changing of players for quite a long time. And I kind of looked at squads and saw where girls were and like, where have they gone? And, you know, some have retired, some have just left the game, some are still maybe playing clubs, some have moved on to other sports, some have had children, some have completely like gone back to other sports. And I'm even thinking of like 2018 and 2019 when I played, and even 2017 when I thought, Jesus, things aren't going well. Like, we were still winning games, and we were still like 2017, which I thought we didn't play particularly well, but we won all our games in Six Nations bar England. Like 2018, you know, you're winning 2 or 3 games, and I was thinking at the time, Jesus, this is poor, but we're still competitive. So where have those players gone? I think it probably resulted from a lot of chopping and changing of different people in, different people out. And like, unlike the men's game where you are like, you're contracted, like if you're not playing for Ireland, you're playing for a club and you're getting paid and you're making a livelihood. But to sustain, to be an international rugby player, to be an elite player, to play at that level and play well, the training that you need to do back then. Oh,
yeah, you're all right.
Am I gone?
We can still hear you.
The battery's going. To be a player at that level and to play international rugby and be a full-time worker, like not a full-time athlete, that's going to be tough if you're not getting picked and there's no reward. So I think those players filter out of the game, unlike the men's game where they stay playing
and get better
for the provinces because it's a livelihood. So that has been a problem as well. So people just gone out of the game, and like there is a few players that could play, but I look at him, is he trying to pick the younger players who are going to be there in 5 years' time? I don't know. And there's certainly like players there that you're like, I think they would do a good job, but it's very complicated. I mean, you try and like, I was trying to think what, like unfortunately, like there has been now like jobs advertised for basically scouts for the provinces that go around and try and build talent. And unfortunately, like that's happened too late. I remember saying that to someone in the RFU in 2017 after a World Cup, because I come from a small club, Portlaoise. I'm from the country. I started off playing rugby, played a lot of sports growing up, played county football, did athletics, and just kind of fell into rugby, loved it. But like no one was going to see the games that I played in. I went for Leinster trials, didn't get picked, and because I was raw, you know what I mean? I wasn't probably got the right rugby language and but I was very capable. And then I went to Connacht and got picked through that. But like no one was coming to see our games, and so I was kind of saying they need to have a scout that goes around to kind of fast track this talent and work with them. And I said that I've been saying it for a long time, but I've been saying it back in 2017. And it's only happening now. So we're like playing catch up now. We're still playing catch up on the professional teams that are in the Six Nations, and they've been professional before. Not all our girls are professional, and some of them are probably development players that we're not seeing in the Six Nations. So it's very nuanced. Players will have to take responsibility for not performing well and doing that, but it's very difficult to fully answer it without looking at every single thing that's built up till now, you know.
It might seem like a ridiculous question, Alison, given it's a 50-point defeat, but can you take any modicum of positivity from the performance on Saturday, like Dan O'Brien at 10 maybe being one of them?
Yeah, like 100%, because I suppose you should never go down the dark section of the comments in the 42 or anything like that. But if you read them, people are like, oh, let them give up. That's terrible. How could they have been improved? But like, realistically, if they'd played the way they did against France, against Wales, it would be a different scoreline, because they brought things in, like their ability to defend them all was better. Like their defence was better. Dan O'Brien at 10. I thought Grace Moore at 7 was very, very good. Sam Monaghan, you know, and there was these glimmers of hope. And I suppose they did like penetrate the line more. They got more go forward. They just couldn't capitalise then on opportunities, which you're hoping maybe if you have, and this is not disrespect to the players there, but if you have, we probably were lacking a big line breaker in the back line, and that could finish those things off, you know. So there was improvements, yeah, definitely. And look, these players will need time, and there will be patience needed. And it is hard if you're losing 50 points to 3, especially if it's a 14 woman France and you're not. But I suppose there's big disparity in the physicality of the players as well. And at the, you know, we just got to figure out a way to get better. And I think one of the problems, I think this is one thing that annoyed me for a long, long time. I think this might have been part of the problem as well from about 2016. Constantly, you know, management and people and players coming out in the media saying we're transitioning. And like, I don't know, but I think if you're a player and you are in that and you're constantly hearing we're in transition, it has that been a factor in where we are today, because you're kind of giving yourself an out not to perform. And that happened from 2016 on. We're rebuilding, we're transitioning. That just got to stop. I think at some stage you just got to say, we're not good enough now at the moment, but we're going to do everything in our power to be better. Like, I remember being in a training camp and a player turned around to me and said, well, but we're in transition. And I just nearly lost the plot. I was like, what? Like, you can't be saying that. Like, you can't be saying it's okay, we're in transition, because that's not going to help you on match day when you're losing the game, or because the other team don't care. So I think that messaging from 2016 constantly from management through the media, that gets hammered home. And I think that hasn't helped us where we're getting to now. You just got to accept that we're not good enough at the moment. And I think, you know, you just got to work on your power to, like, and the girls will say that at the moment, that they're not good enough at the moment in certain areas, but they're constantly, they're going to be improved. And I think that's just it. The girls will have to just really, really work hard on that, and the full-time contracts will help that. But unfortunately, we're chasing now, aren't we? Because we were the last union to do that, and I feel like we were kind of pushed into it. We weren't ambitious and try and get ahead of the posse when we could have. We were the last country to do it, so that has been problematic and obviously the range of contracts. And we've got to the stage where a lot of people have left the game, and they might have taken up contracts back 2017 maybe, you know, because they were looking at a World Cup that they could have qualified for. But now the World Cup, you got to be a younger player maybe to take those contracts, because they're quite low in the actual sum of them. And you might want to, like, if you were older and you're in a good job and you're on the career ladder, you're maybe not going to risk that. So there's so many factors in this, really.
Yeah. All right. It's a factory of sadness at the moment. Alison, great to have you with us. Thanks a million.
No problem, guys. Bye-bye.
It's Alison Miller giving us some considered thoughts on the situation at the weekend where Ireland got hammered. Fergus Keogh was asking whether there'd be a fear of Ireland shipping 100 against England. There must be. Like, there actually there has to be at this stage. So
transition. That's an interesting point. Like, because I actually think it's a legitimate thing to say a team's in transition, but I fully take Alison's point that it can probably change the psychology of a team. Like, I think genuinely teams can be in transition, but the problem, as Alison says, is how long are you in transition for? Like, since 2016 we appear to have been in that.
Well, I think that the signal coming from the IRFU when they decided to pick their favourite child of the Sevens team, and Alison identified it there, that's the original sin, and everything stems from that, where they're like, well, that's 15's game isn't important. But the difficulty now is that the 15's game is the one that, so Alison said she was watching the Hong Kong Sevens. I think Ireland finished just out of where they needed to finish to guarantee automatic qualification. There's one round of qualification still left for the Olympics, and that they've put, again, the chips are in the centre of the table trying to qualify for the Olympics. But in Ireland, has that had crossover appeal to the fans? So the women's games are on Virgin and RTE, so everybody sees them, and everybody's seeing the rugby team get hammered. Is that good for the long term, for recruitment of hearts and minds and a new fan base? And also for interest, young girls getting involved. Like, young girls are watching the Irish women's football team play and win and get to World Cups, and they're probably thinking, I wouldn't mind doing that. But if young girls are tuning into the rugby team, the reality is results Did anybody
matter.
watch the Sevens though? That's like,
no.
You have to go looking for it to find
exactly.
it.
Yes.
And so, did they make the right decision or did they make the wrong decision? And even if they'd made the wrong decision by prioritising the Sevens, not backing up the 15s the way all the other unions have eventually realised it was the original sin, and they'll talk about money, but the IRFU have been sitting on loads of money for a long period of time, and they chose not to invest in the women's game until, as Alison said, it feels a little bit like they were forced into it. So, there's definitely a concern about the players who aren't available at the moment and who aren't being chosen or aren't being picked, and there's a lost generation there that's hollowed out. So a lot of pressure on the coaching ticket, a lot of pressure on the players, and the IRFU not really coming out and saying, actually, you know what, this isn't acceptable and we have to hold our hands up and say we made a mistake. It's like, oh no, we dealt with everything. But if there hadn't been that letter in the papers, would any of the investment have happened afterwards, or would the IRFU still be going, look, it doesn't really matter, the Sevens is where it's at?
It's systemic.
OTB AM live with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night edition available now. We're turning to the league finals, and I'm delighted to say Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiner is with us to talk to us. Really, we're going to focus on the Division 1 and 2 finals at the moment. Let's start with the Dubs and Derry. I'd love to know what would have happened if Derry had kept Dublin out for a little bit longer. At what point did you feel like Derry's resolve / interest in the fixture waned, Maurice?
This is a very simplistic answer, but when Conor Glass went off, I think Roy Gallagher's made a big play about the fact that he's a smaller panel than basically everybody else. I think they're working off a panel of 29 versus the typical 36. And when you pull their star midfielder and throw on top of that the fact that their best man marker and Chrissy McKay are both missing, it just felt like the wheels kind of came off from that point on. So, Ger, I know there's a lot of talk maybe about the Derry structure and the way they were carved open. I just think you pull 2 key players, they don't have the depth to cover for that. So suddenly James McCarthy was saying lovely he could track Brendan Rodgers over every inch of the ground, and he did a great job on him. There was no real good matchup for Fenton, and Dublin just from that point on they tore him to shreds. I don't think there was. It's a very simple answer, I know, but I don't think there was too much more to it than that.
And is that defensive structure that was not evident? Like, because the goals that Dublin did score represented about a 50% conversion rate, or even less in terms of goal chances. So was that just Derry being vanilla because they don't want Fermanagh or whoever else later on in the year to see? I can't understand how Derry go from being really good in Derry against Dublin to having themselves carved open so much, unless it's down to the dubs and a few long balls in, and also Con being Con again.
So there's 2 parts to my answer to that. I think the first thing is that sometimes I find it curious. People point to defensive structure in a situation like that, or even you look at I know we're going to talk about the Division 1 game in a second, but the amount of goal chances Galway coughed up, and some people might point to Conor Loftus, for example, their centre back, and so oftentimes I think when you watch it back, the damage is happening further out the field. It's an untracked runner. It's John Maher for Galway, for example, and maybe nobody would have expected him to get as much leeway as he did, but his probing runs, nobody's able to track him, and suddenly then it's kind of like a domino effect, from that point on. And that's what I thought that happened in the Dublin game as well. These runners punching from deep. Now, I did think, I don't say this too often, Ger, I thought Desi was very interesting after the game, that when he's talking about the amount of work they've done on goals, and especially when you take this in the context of the goal chance that they did not take against Derry, when Ciarán Kenny looks across, or we don't know if he saw, it was Acosta on the back post, wasn't it? But he decides to fist over for whatever reason. I don't think that's going to happen again for Dublin this year, to the extent where at times I thought they were actually overplaying it at the weekend, and some of the chances they didn't take, Newcombs in particular, you would wonder about, but the fact that they were so determined to carve out goal chances was a fairly ominous warning, I think, to anybody else who's going to come up against them this year, that they put that right.
Will there be a psychology, Maurice? Like, there's a distinct possibility that Derry and Dublin will meet again at some point down the line in the championship this year, like in some form. Like, will yesterday have a bearing? Do you think there's going to be a little bit of a scar given how many goals they conceded? That just isn't a Derry thing to do. Or do you think Rory Gallagher will take a lot from yesterday and say, well, Jesus, it was a one-off, we'll learn from it?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Shane. I don't know if it's a psychological damage in terms of playing against Dublin versus playing in Croke Park. It was often a criticism that I wasn't necessarily sure about, that will this system hold up in Croke Park? And they've been carved open for goals, whether you like it or not. The last 2 times they played there, Galway did it to them in a very similar fashion. It has to be said, this quick break out, that was one thing that was noticeable with Dublin, is that it reminded me a bit of, it was kind of 2012, 2013 tactics, where you've got a lot of players behind the ball, but as soon as you turn over, you're determined to break as quickly as you can. Tom Lahiff had a goal chance in the first half, which was remarkably similar to that, which was basically, we have the ball and it's a ball run, then everybody is flooding forward. So from that perspective, I don't think it's a necessary association with Dublin. The fact they bet Dublin already this year, I don't think there'll be much sway with yesterday. But I do think the idea that will this style hold up in Croke Park is now, it's a live question, definitely.
We're constantly talking about Stephen Cluxton, and I know it's probably something that Desi Farrell would love to just go away, but the reality is he's sitting on the bench and he's one of the greatest footballers of all time. Should he or will he play any part in the championship for Dublin, do you think?
No, that's my answer. Go on.
I agree with you, Ger, yeah. How can you look at what David Hannon has done? To my mind, the standout goalkeeper across both divisions.
So is he just in for his leadership or
He's
experience
in because they have
in the
an
group?
injury crisis. I think everybody's making far too much of this. They have an injury crisis. Evan Comerford, who was their first choice last year, isn't going to be available until later in the championship, is what Desi said on Dubs TV last week. The under-20s goalkeeper is injured as well. This guy is available to them. I think that's all it is, right?
Yeah, it's not the most interesting conversation if we're all in agreement with each other, but I 100% agree with you. I think just go back over the league. Hannon has done nothing wrong. I think they scored 1-2 off his kick out yesterday. His save actually yesterday was brilliant. He made a great save from Kieran Downs in the Loud game the week before that. Go back to the Cork game, he basically saved them that day as well. He's done everything that has been asked of him. There's no way you could point to something in his performance. If he's dropped for Cluxton come the championship, I think it sends a really bad message, to be honest. So I agree with you. I think it's fit in for a void Comerford did very well last year. We weren't sure if Hannon was able to deputise for him. It turns out he can. Let him at it.
I think if Comerford was fit, they wouldn't have made the SOS call. Because, if Hannon gets injured or gets sent off in a game, who are you going to? And they obviously didn't feel like they had enough depth. But now if you're going to Cluxton and he's the cavalry and he's happy with that role, then I think that's relentlessly positive, as opposed to this it's desperation. Anyway, we'll have that conversation again with Tommy later on in the week. We not to labour the point on Dublin, but Mannion didn't start yesterday. Obviously Jack McCaffrey still to come back into the team as well, and then you have a few others, like if Howard is still a first choice, I'm not sure he's going to get back into the team this year, but for first 15-20 minutes I thought this isn't great, and then they managed to break Derry's resolve, and they looked like they were a team kind of reforming, kind of reassembling some sense of identity and confidence, and notwithstanding really poor shooting for points, Dublin look pretty good, and they look like, again, they're a team who don't have to peak for another month and a half, really.
Yeah, and that was particularly glaring yesterday, definitely, Ger, just in terms of, Ciara Kilkenny, he didn't start, but he came on very early and had two on his left foot, had two bad wides early, and it kind of, when there's, I don't think a game has to be high quality for it to be entertaining, but when there's a lot of sloppy play, like sloppy turnovers or poor shooting, it kind of sucks the atmosphere out of a game slightly, and that's how it felt for a large part in the first half. And then a guy who the word gets overused, but I do think he is really underrated is John Small, and he comes up and has a great goal chance, blast over. He obviously gets his goal in the second half, but I think he's been, if you go back to 2015 when Dublin bet Kerry, there's not as many of that team left. Well, Cluxton obviously is back now, but even still, there's not as many of that team left as you would think. But John Small came on that day, was man of the match a year later. He's ultra consistent. I would say you could point to nearly every other player and say they've had loads. I'm not saying he's the best player by any stretch, but the level he brings every single week, he brings it consistently. And he did it again yesterday. He was man of the match. I think that moment when he burst forward and creates the goal chance was kind of the first chance you saw, they've actually opened Derry up here. There was a chance on there, and then Lahif has his chance, and then the goal comes, and then you're thinking, okay, Derry really need to come back into this. And when you see Glass go down and holding his hamstring, the second you saw that, you're thinking, wow, the tide is turned here.
One last point to make on Dublin is that this year, the level of fitness that they have at the end of the league and the players who are fit, they're much further along than they have been in the last number of years. But there's no significant doubts about a huge number of players to come back or whether or not they're going to be fit. Now, obviously, they will get injuries as the season goes on, but James McCarthy is fully fit. Conor Callaghan is fully fit. We haven't had that at the end of the league. John Small is fully fit at that. So maybe Paddy Small isn't around, but there's definitely a sense that they're in a much better, stronger position than they have been in previous years. And then you're layering in that if they were to play Kerry again under the same circumstances as last year, they'll have McCaffrey, they'll have Mannion, and they'll have Conor Callaghan, which they didn't have. So I think the gap at the top is completely, it's paper thin if there is a gap at all. What about the First Division final then? Obviously, in the aftermath of it, Mayo are happy and trying to celebrate, but not too much because they have a massive game next week.
They have a huge game, next week. I thought Mayo, there's a lot of cause for optimism. The fact that amidst all the push for change and idea of a new style, that it has kind of been an evolution, not revolution. They didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So when a team drops off them, gives them up, concedes the kick out and forces them to run the ball, they're not trying to force the ball and kick it in and concede loads of turnovers. That they're willing to go back to what works or what has worked to a certain extent over the last couple of years if they need to. So suddenly then you're looking at it and you think, okay, they can, if they have the opportunity, they're still going to play a kicking game. But on the flip side, they haven't gone totally away from what they've been very, very good at for long stretches of time. The moment for that to sum it up for me was their first point from play. Remarkably, their first point from play in the second half was in the 70th minute, and it was Jim O'Connor flying up the field, coming off the shoulder of Owen McLaughlin, coming off his shoulder of Sam Callaghan, and you're thinking, wow, this is a new Mayo, but it's still the same old Mayo as well. They still have the ability to do that. On the flip side, though, I do think I thought Galway set a template for how teams are going to try and beat Mayo this year. And I think that will be particularly frustrating. That I actually thought they got their structure right, but execution let them down. So as well as the encouragement from Mayo, I think there will be a huge amount of frustration in Galway at the fact that it was 1981 the last time they won a league final, and that way it's going to go on now.
When you looked at the program, the match program before the throw-in, Maurice, you're looking at the Mayo full back line. You're thinking that's young, that's inexperienced, but the likes of Jack Coyne and the likes of Sam Callanan, who you mentioned, really stood up, and Coyne in particular was brilliant. That must be so encouraging for Kevin McStay.
Yeah, I don't know how they keep doing it, Shane. You know, they produce these incredibly athletic, rampaging forward defenders like Callanan, who's in the same mould as a lot of what we've seen previously with Mayo, and then they also have an uncanny ability to find one great man marker. If it isn't Chris Barrett, they move on and get somebody else. Oisin Mullin became that for the last couple of years, and now suddenly they've got Jack Coyne, who just did not give Finn any space to breathe yesterday. He was on top of him for the entire game, so that's really encouraging. I wouldn't pick. I know Galway created a huge amount of goal chances. As I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of the damage was happening further out the field. It was John Maher's goal chance is a classic example. It's a guy who's running forward from deep and maybe not necessarily being tracked. The one match we thought actually Mayo had a huge advantage, it turns out didn't pan out, which was in midfield, and Galway probably got on top there. But in terms of defensively, Mayo are very strong there. What's new?
And Galway, I guess, you mentioned the midfield battle, but Killian McDade's not there. But you look at the Galway panel, and it's certainly compared to 3 or 4 years ago, there's a lot more strength and depth. Like, the players coming off the bench all of a sudden are making a real difference. Now, yesterday they struggled, but overall, you would think there are shoots of positivity for Joyce as well.
Yeah, and it's a very unfair comparison because Galway have a huge amount more players, and 3 of their clubs were in junior, senior, intermediate All-Ireland semi-finals this year. But I was looking at Derry and saying, you pulled their star midfielder and star defender out of the team, and then you flip it and you look at Galway, and they're without McDade, and I know Silker, Malloy aren't going to be back, but it's very similar. The fact, and Galway have just developed a lovely bit of depth this year, kind of under the radar, I would have said. John Maher, for example, I think that's just a remarkable story, and amidst all the talk about Ian Burke and Peter Cook being recalled, maybe it didn't get the attention it deserves, but like, this is a guy, lads, in 2020 Mayo destroyed Galway in the league. I don't know if you remember that in Tuam during COVID, and John Maher made his debut that day, was taken off at half time, and I'd say there's a lot of people, if you talked to them around Galway, who thought we would never see him again, and he doesn't get called into the Galway squad for 2021 or 2022, but has a brilliant year with his club. John O'Mahony took over Sachel Knockcara, and he logged a brilliant year. Told John O'Mahony, by all accounts, at the very start of the year that he was hoping to log a great campaign and then get back in with Galway. Did it. He said he wasn't sure if we were going to see much of him. He was an unused sub against Mayo at the first game of the league this year. Came on against Donegal, was really good, was excellent against Tyrone, and now kicked 2 points against Kerry last week and was probably the best midfielder in Croke Park in the Division 1 final yesterday. So that rise is remarkable. I don't know how they managed to accelerate the growth that they did, but he's a huge find for them, because if you go back to the All-Ireland final last year, I thought Conroy kind of ran out of legs and they didn't really seem to have a replacement field option now. And now that's just one of many positions they suddenly have depth in.
It's come to a boil nicely. Like, it's unfortunate that we have the provincials to waste our time for the next 5 or 6 weeks.
It is. I think there still is an element of intrigue. I have to say, you will still get the Mayo Roscommon game will still keep you entertained. Armagh, even if they do get over Antrim, you're suddenly looking ahead to watching Cavan at the weekend, and that could be a very tantalising game. And the great thing about those games, at least I think anyway, Ger, is I think all those teams are going gung-ho to win a provincial title. I don't think there will be any shadow boxing there. So you're looking at Leinster and Munster, and it's probably hard to get too excited about a lot of what we're going to see there. But there still is enough to kind of get your fix if you need it.
Oh yeah, we do need our fix. I'm being mildly facetious about there being, like, obviously that Roscommon game now. Roscommon are delighted, I'd say, that Mayo came through that, and that there will be just that little bit of, we've done something, and they'll be absolutely ready to puncture it next week. But to the point about Galway, right? Like, I do think Pádraig Joyce deserves a lot of credit for his ability to change and learn, and he's a different character now from the one who came in and announced boldly that I'm here to win All Ireland and we're going to do it the old school traditional Galway way. He's a much more nuanced and polished and humble and therefore better manager than he was when he arrived, I think it's fair to say.
I agree with you, yeah. And yes, there was a perfect example of that. I don't think, if you had said that Galway were going to concede, kickouts, drop off, it was just classic Cian yesterday, wasn't it? Once they get to the 45, they kind of really hit hard and honest, and if it wasn't for some maybe questionable frees. Like, they limited Mayo to 4 points in play yesterday. I think they had more turnovers than Mayo did. It just, the other end, those kind of chances would really not them. There was if you include Johnny Heaney's, which you probably should, there's 5 goal chances. Of the 4 saves, 2 were brilliant, I thought. On top of that, then you've got, like, is it 3 or 2 missed 45s and 1 missed free from Walsh? Comer misses the mark, and that's the Hawkeye one as well. That clips the post. So from that perspective, I think Joyce, there's maybe 3 parts to this, if you want, Ger. There's the initial kind of all the optimism, then suddenly their style gets slightly exposed. He goes back to the drawing board post 2021, brings in Cian O'Neill, and they build a new style. And then I actually think there was been a further step taken, because post an All-Ireland final, there's a lot of pitfalls after the rise comes the fall. You know, that there's a lot of things that could have gone wrong. So you have the Shane Walsh saga around the transfer. Damien Comer was on a year break. He goes travelling for a bit. There wasn't necessarily sure when he was going to come back. There's all this, constant. I feel like I bring this up every time I talk to you, Jerry, but the constant kind of toxic narrative around a goalkeeper like Conor Gleeson. I don't think that's. This weekend for me was a testament to all goalkeepers across. As good as Reap was, Gleeson made an excellent save in the second half there as well. And that was I already mentioned Hannon in the Division 2 game. You've got Sean McNally made some great saves for Fermanagh. Mark Jackson kicking frees, which was absolutely outrageous. Galligan doing the same. So it was a great weekend for goalkeepers. But just to go back to the point, there was a lot of potential things that could have gone wrong there for Galway, and instead they stuck with their number one. They've developed a nice bit of depth, maybe evolved their game ever so slightly to get better at striking that balance. So I don't think we're not sitting here saying that it was a disaster for Galway yesterday. The only thing is that within 12 months now, it's 3 finals lost. At some point, finals are there for winning, as they say, and they kind of need to get over the line in those games.
Yeah.
You were tweeting yesterday, Maurice, as well about Tommy Conroy, and I think I was in the stadium myself, and it is one of those things where every time he gets the ball, you do expect something to happen, and it's just lovely to see a footballer every time he gets the ball take the defender on, and it's just beautiful to watch. He's an exciting talent for Mayo this year as well.
Shane, you are preaching to the choir. I have to say, I completely understand why, if you're coaching an inside forward now, you'd be telling him he needs to strike a balance between laying it off and coming on the loop, and you can't always drop the shoulder and take a guy on. But it is just so exciting that there still is a guy who's willing to do that, who his first instinct when he gets the ball in his hands is, I'm going to drop the right shoulder and I'm going to take you on. And if that doesn't work, I'll drop the left and I'll take you on that side. And it just, you mentioned beating the ground yesterday. I genuinely did think it was electrifying anytime he got on the ball, that you knew, okay, this is what he's going to do. And it could end up a multitude of ways. I thought the free he got at the end was very soft. I thought he was lucky there. But just the fact that you have a guy who, there still is space for a guy to put the head down and take a guy on. How long have we been saying for the last couple of years we'd like to see Conor Callahan do a bit more of that? The fact that we have a guy who, that's his first port of call always, is to go and have a go, I think is a good thing. And I wouldn't be necessarily discouraging him from doing it.
Maurice, we've got to leave it there. Good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Thanks, lads.
Maurice Brosnan there with his thoughts on the weekend's league fixtures. Obviously, we can stick a pin in that now and we move on immediately to the provincial championships. There will be a power rankings this week. If you have any thoughts, you can get in touch with us. You can leave a comment on youtube.com/offtheball, or of course you can just hit Tommy up directly. But there will be a power rankings this week. 13 minutes past 9 this morning. If you want to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. The OTB Podcast Network, some of the highlights for you. Kenny Cunningham's goodness post-match after the Newcastle victory against Manchester United yesterday, the Sunday paper review, and our GA reaction from the weekend as well. Make sure you follow Off the Ball across our social channels and subscribe to the OTB Podcast Network. After the break, we've got Cian Tracey on the Champions Cup.
You're listening
to OTB AM. Off the Ball Daily.
A home for your favourite podcasts from Off the Ball. The performance rankings, You Had to Be There, the crappy quiz, and a slight tangent.
Ireland against Scotland in World Cup B.
In Chile.
The World Plate. World Cup B is growing on me. As a name.
Subscribe to the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed right now.
OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.
Right, 14 minutes past 9 this morning. We're turning back to rugby and to the Heineken Champions Cup. Cian Tracey is with us of the Irish Independent. Cian, let's start with Munster. 50 points away from home. and not really a glove landed in the second half. Where are Munster at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ger. It's a hard one to get your head around, really. I mean, when you look at their last 3 games, I mean, at such a crucial point of the season, they've gone to pot, really. 130 points, 18 tries, and like 80 of those points in the last 2 games were against teams like the Scarlets in Glasgow, who aren't even in the knockout stages of the Champions Cup. So I would say, you know, their attack has definitely improved. We saw that again on Saturday, despite the heavy defeat. They still managed to score 5 tries. They scored a couple of really nice tries, albeit I think the 2 late consolation tries put a bit of gloss to the scoreline that probably didn't reflect really how dominant the Sharks were. So I think a lot of the problems of old that we saw in the early part of the season, where you could almost kind of excuse it because it was a new coaching team coming in, new ideas, players looking to adapt. Whereas, and to be fair, they did cure those kind of ills. So what I'm talking about is their work around the breakdown, which was a real Achilles heel for them at the start of the season, and that came back to haunt them once again. And like at this stage of the season, I don't think there's any excuses for that. They just seemed like Craig Casey was exposed so often, and I think so much of that was down to the pack leaving him exposed. They didn't look like they knew how many numbers to commit to the breakdown. The Sharks counter-upped them off the ball. So, I mean, Munster's pack has probably been an issue. Well, it has been an issue for a while, and certainly their front row has been an issue. And they're the same old problems, really. And even if you have a new coaching staff coming in, when you don't have the personnel to, I would say, compete with the likes of the big South African teams, your Leinsters of this world, it's going to come back to bite you. And that's what happened again. So defensively, really, really poor. Their set piece wasn't great. Like their scrum was demolished, breakdown obliterated. And yeah, so there are concerning signs. I think, you know, they've got to go back down to South Africa now again in 2 weeks for 2 games against the Stormers and to play the Sharks again to not only save their season this year in terms of their URC playoff hopes, but also to save next season. Because if Munster don't qualify for the Champions Cup next season, like it's pretty unthinkable really for a province of that size, isn't it?
Well, it's going to have a knock-on impact on season ticket sales and big games and your ability to recruit and just, you know, we know the difficulties and the pitfalls. So all of a sudden, all the eggs are in the URC basket and there's just no sign of a performance coming.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I was kind of putting last weekend, or the week before last weekend against Glasgow, down to just a bit of a blip, a kind of a post-Six Nations hangover. But it's not like a Leinster where you're welcoming back a load of Ireland stars. Okay, Ty Byrne is out injured. Conor Murray came back, but he seems to be second choice at Munster now behind Craig Casey, and Peter O'Mahony then is the only one you're having coming back. So you can't be relying on like these kind of guys to lift the standards. Like we see it in time and time again. You look at Leinster a couple of weeks ago, the likes of Rhys Ruddock or Luke McGrath maintaining the standards while other guys are away, and that just isn't happening in Munster at the moment. So look, the conditions I think were a factor as well. I think it got up to about 29 degrees, I think, at one point in Durban on Saturday. The humidity was off the charts as well. But I mean, I don't think these are really excuses that Munster will look to. And to be fair, they didn't. Like Peter O'Mahony was speaking afterwards, he didn't look to use it as an excuse. But, you know, Munster have spoken so often this season about how the speed of their training has gone through the roof. And I've no doubt that it has, particularly compared to what they would have been used to under the previous regime. But their fitness let them down, I thought, at the weekend, allowing for the difficult conditions. I mean, when they came out for the second half, and like it's very important to remember, there was only 3 points in the game at half time. Was it 17-14? I think it was off the top of my head. So like only 3 points, and then to totally collapse. I don't know, was it a mental thing? But to me, it looked like a fitness issue, because they came out for the second half and they looked absolutely gassed. Whereas I think the Sharks knew that they were going to have them once they came to the crunch. And as soon as the Sharks cranked up the heat, pardon the pun, in terms of the power that they were bringing, Munster had absolutely no answer to it. And I wouldn't mind, but last week in the press conference build up to the game, Graham Rowntree was speaking about, you know, how it was so important that Munster didn't give the Sharks easy access into the game, because they didn't want to be defending mauls. Like, they knew how strong the Sharks maul was. And yet after half time, Bongi Ngamangi, sorry, that's a bad pronunciation, the Springboks hooker scored 2 maul tries within the space of about 5 minutes, and that was the game done and dusted. So from having gone from being 3 points down all of a sudden the game was dead and buried and it got away from them. And like I said, 2 late consolation tries shouldn't detract from how far off Munster were from the Sharks.
As you say, Cian, the weather factors obviously had to play some sort of an impact. It was interesting to listen to Peter O'Mahony speaking afterwards, where he's talking about the breakdown being a serious issue yesterday. You know, disruptive, and they just weren't clinical. So is that an ongoing problem? Is that a deep-rooted issue, or is that something that can be fixed quite quickly?
I think it can be fixed. Like I said, it was a problem in the early part of the season, and they did seem to fix it. But like, to me, it just looked like, and it kind of made this point, that the players looked confused about how many men they were supposed to be committing to each ruck. And what happened then was they'd slow ball to play off, and then when they did eventually have the ball, Craig Casey was being snagged by Sharks players who were absolutely flooding the breakdown. So it was a point that Graham Rowntree made afterwards. It was just that the Sharks were reloading and reloading really quickly, and Munster just couldn't deal with that. So I think when they were doing their analysis of this Sharks team, they would have known exactly what was coming. But there's a serious power deficit in that Munster pack, and you know, it's harsh enough to say it, but until they address that problem, and I think particularly in the front row, Munster are going nowhere fast. And as harsh as that sounds, I think that that's just the reality of the situation. And I think any Munster supporter who's being honest would reflect that as well. They're nowhere near being a Heineken Champions Cup winning team this season. That's fair enough. But to go into a last 16 clash and knockout clash, like, it's just, Munster aren't used to being blown out of the water like this. So you look at their recruitment over the last couple of years, and I know I've spoken to you guys about it before, like they brought in, you know, someone like Malachi Fekitoa this season, whereas the budget could have been spent on trying to get a front row in. So they're going to have to look at that over the off season, you know, post World Cup, to try and get a big hooker. I think a big hooker. I know they were linked with Malcolm Marx in the past. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, you'd need to have an enormous checkbook to attract him. And as Ger, you made the point that if there's no Champions Cup rugby next season, then it's going to be very difficult to attract these big names. But that's ultimately what Munster need. I think they do have a few exciting players coming through the academy. If you look at the 20s, guys like Ruan Quinn and Brian Gleeson, but they're back rows, and Munster are already pretty stocked in the back row. It's the front row that really need reinforcements if Munster are going to take the next step. But we've been saying this for I don't know how many years. So it needs, I think, the board behind the scenes and whoever's making the decisions in terms of the recruitment to come together and realise that until they address this issue, Munster are stalling, I think.
Is there any concerns from a wider Irish rugby perspective that the power deficit when the big South African sides are coming at us is still so pronounced? Bear in mind, even Etzebeth was clutching a bag of ice on the sidelines and didn't even play the full game, and they didn't even bat an eyelid. It was like irrelevant because the next man up is just as strong, if not even stronger. Like, is there a concern? I mean, maybe Leinster might be able to allay those concerns, but we will obviously face South African opposition in the World Cup, that they're just bigger men than us.
No, I think that argument has been kind of put to bed a little bit from an Irish context. I certainly think Leinster have questions to answer. I know we'll get on and talk about them, but like Leinster have been beaten by La Rochelle for the last couple of seasons, and they still have question marks to answer, as well as they're playing and blowing everyone else out of the water. But in terms of an Irish context, like Ireland beat South Africa last November. They beat Australia. They went down to New Zealand and won a tour. They beat France this year. So, like, I think they've kind of answered those questions. I think South Africa at the World Cup will be a different proposition. But like this time last year, we were probably having real concerns about where Ireland were. They'd lost to France. The tour to New Zealand looked really daunting. And all of a sudden, it looks much more positive. So I think we're seeing that in terms of, you look at the Leinster pack that played at the weekend, pretty much an Irish starting pack, and what they did to Ulster by squeezing them to death, really, I think Ireland are capable of doing that against most teams. Obviously, like against South Africa, that's going to be much more difficult. But if you look at the game plan that Ireland are playing under Andy Farrell and how quick the tempo they're playing at, I would have less concerns than I would have had at this stage last year, albeit South Africa in the World Cup are going to be really, really difficult.
Okay, let's talk about Ulster. We can talk about Leinster again. What's the truth about where Ulster are at the moment as well? Because there was some shots fired, but nowhere near enough, and there was never, it looked like a real sense of belief from Ulster that they were going to be able to turn Leinster over.
Yeah, I think the scoreline, is a reflection, I think, of I would say, a considerable gap, if not a large gap, between the two teams. I think the game itself went exactly as I was expecting it. I kind of just made the point there in terms of the Leinster pack doing the number on Ulster. And if you look at that Ulster pack, and it's probably similar to Munster in many ways, I just don't think that pack is going to strike fear into any of the top teams in Europe, really, including the South African team. So I think when you woke up on Saturday morning and saw how bad the weather was, there was a lot of people kind of saying, oh, this could be a bit of a leveler. But I actually thought the complete opposite. I thought it played right into Leinster's hands, because we all know that Leinster, on a dry, fast track like Ireland, can play unbelievably exciting rugby. But they can also do the nitty gritty as well, and their pack absolutely destroyed Ulster. Really, really impressive. So, yeah, Ulster. I think Ulster have stagnated a bit. If I'm being honest, I think they need some fresh ideas in there. Their attack is nowhere near as cutting edge as what it was. Like, you think back to last season, Ger, when they were rightfully coming in for lots of praise, the likes of Mike Lowry, Balakoon, James Hume, and that was being reflected in the Irish squad as well. And suddenly those guys are nowhere near an Ireland squad now, and that's reflective, I think, in probably the restrictive game plan that they're playing. I think 10 is a major issue for them. Now, to be fair, to give Billy Burns some credit, it doesn't really matter kind of who plays 10 if your pack is being destroyed as it was last weekend. But I just think they lack direction from 10. Like, you can see what Billy Burns is capable of with that lovely crossfield kick for James Hume, but moments like that just are few and far between, particularly in these big games. So I don't know if they maybe need, they lost a couple of key coaches over the last couple of years, and I think we've seen how important they've been. There's been lots of focus on the defence in terms of how important Jared Payne was. He went off to Claremont and Johnny Bell came in. But not a lot was said about Dwayne Peel leaving as well. And he had a massive say, obviously, over the attack. And Dan Soper has taken over there. And I don't know, the attack just, to me, has kind of stalled a little bit. And I think they could do it. Like, I don't know if it's a new coach to come in. I think a different, fresh pair of eyes. And certainly they could do, they're bringing in a couple of new players next season. But you look at the pack, like Dwayne Vermeulen looks a shadow of him, of his former self. I don't think he's getting the go-forward ball that he used to. And when you come up against a Leinster team who you just play right into their hands, I think it was a foregone conclusion, really, despite what the scoreline reflected. Leinster were much, much better. And that's just the reality, I think, of where the power dynamic lies between Leinster, Ulster and Munster and Connacht, if we're being honest.
Like that power dynamic, Cian, and Dan McFarlane almost referenced it afterwards. I think that's an 11th defeat in 14 games that he's played against Leinster under his tenure. But he said afterwards, it is what it is, isn't it? I can't change the demographics. They've just got way more rugby players, way more earning potential in terms of the money. Pointing out the 14 of the starting team for Leinster were Grand Slam winners with Ireland. But is there almost a resignation? When I hear comments like that, I almost feel like there's a resignation that there's Leinster and then there's a gap.
Yeah, I think you've got to show, I think, a little bit more ambition. And I know we spoke about the conditions there in Durban. The conditions in Dublin were rubbish as well. But I think you've got to show a bit more ambition. I think maybe like Ireland have shown that as well. When you come up against the bigger and the stronger teams, you've got to think your way out of trouble. And I don't think Ulster did that. Leinster's game plan was so smart. They knew how strong the Ulster maul was, which we saw obviously for the Rob Herring try, but Leinster just gave them so few opportunities to get that maul going. They kept anytime they were kicking the ball long, they make sure they kept it in play, which obviously ensured that the ball and play time was quite high then as well, because they wanted to tire out the Ulster pack. And I think for one moment you talk about the power, Shane. I think that the moment for me that summed it up was just after Rob Herring scored the try on 59 minutes, what it brought it back to, 23-15. You were kind of going, okay, maybe Ulster do have a chance here. Ross Byrne takes the kick off, kicks it dead. You get a scrum back on the halfway line, so an Ulster scrum on halfway, and Leinster absolutely pulverise Ulster on their own ball, win the penalty. Ross Byrne kicks it down. Jimmy O'Brien gets held up over the line. Leinster come back for a penalty, and Andrew Porter scores the try. So we hear the players talking about, how their next moment focus and not to back up a mistake with another mistake. And we saw that in ruthless fashion from Leinster. So that was a massive psychological win. I was having a watch back of the game last night. You could see the reaction of the players, guys like Ross Maloney, Tyg Furlong and Andrew Porter. And when you're pushing, your Irish rivals off their own ball in a scrum, it's just massive. And I think it was really deflating. You could almost see the life being sucked out of Ulster and Leinster, it got the try that they needed to push on, and I think, like I said, the game was beyond any doubt then at that stage.
We're getting a lot of grief for not doing enough on Leinster in the comments, but we've actually got the rest of the season to talk about Leinster. That's the whole point here, that for the next few weeks they're literally the only team that we're going to be talking from the URC. Look, Leinster have always been talking about the fifth star, and it has become their guiding North Star for the last period of time. It's going to be a devastating season for them if they don't win the European Cup, given that they're at home for every match. And I would hope the Aviva will be sold out again on Friday. It's Good Friday. What else are people going to be doing? And hopefully the weather's a bit better and they get to play some champagne rugby against Leicester. Yeah,
I'd say they'll be doing well, Ger, to sell out the Aviva Stadium with that much notice on Good Friday, particularly having sold it out this weekend. So yeah, Leicester, I watched them on Friday night against Edinburgh and I was not impressed with them at all, just like I wasn't impressed with them when Leinster wiped the floor with them. I was over in Welford Road last season for the quarter final, so I think Leinster could put a big score on Leicester, if I'm being honest. This week Josh van der Fleer is a doubt, that would be a blow, but you've got guys like Scott Penny or Will Connors to come in. Caelan Doris and Gary Ringrose, it sounds like, are going to be available again. So the wheel keeps turning from a Leinster point of view, but like you say, it'd be really disappointing if they did go on and win it, and absolutely it would be now, because they could potentially have two finals in Dublin, and that's a massive advantage. Even if you think back to last season's Champions Cup final, and I know it was in Marseille as opposed to La Rochelle, but being in France, it felt like a home game for Ron Nogar's lads. So the stars are definitely aligning for Leinster, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion in any sense of the way, even though they are playing at home. Like, it'd be really disappointing, but it's been really disappointing for the last few years, sure, you'd have to say, because Leinster haven't fulfilled their undoubted potential by adding that fifth star. You know, Toulouse beat them to the drive for five, as they're calling it. So look, they're not shying away from that. That's what's driving them, but they still have questions to answer. Like, in a weird sort of quirk, their run to the final looks like it's going to be the exact same as what it was last season if results go as expected. So you imagine they're going to play Leicester on Friday. Most likely they're going to play Toulouse in the semi-final again at the Aviva, a repeat of last year. And then if La Rochelle get their way, and they had to come through a real scare against Gloucester on Saturday as well, but you kind of felt like that was maybe the speed bump along the way. So it's interesting that the way the cards have fallen, that it could potentially be the same as last year. And I think if you were to speak to Leo Cullen or any of the Leinster players, they would tell you that they would love another crack at La Rochelle in the final, because I think they have some demons that need to be banished.
Good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us, Cian. Cheers.
Cheers, lads.
It's Cian Tracey, the Irish Independent there. And sorry, I didn't realise, but the top tiers at the moment look like they're going to be shut unless there's a surge of early tickets. So 27,000 might be the capacity for the home game this weekend. I don't know. I think that maybe a lot of people will decide to go and see the Irish Grand Slam winners at home.
Yeah, I guess the problem is that it's not another Irish province they're playing, so the away fans won't help to boost the crowd. But yeah,
were there that many Ulster fans?
It seemed to be a decent number, judging by the TV. But it was, it'll be tough to sell it out. I think maybe they'll sell just a little bit more to mean that the top tiers can be open. But it is short notice, isn't it? I mean, all of a sudden Leinster fans are like, well, will we go?
Oh yeah, well they should definitely go.
Yeah.
Why blame the Glazers for Manchester United's overspending their budget on Anthony rather than admit that Ten Hag got the signing wrong, says Edward Freeman, who succinctly makes the point that I was making a little bit earlier on. Bobby Dwyer says, as a Spurs fan, not a chance I take Brendan Rodgers. He may not rub the players up the wrong way, but he rubs the fans up the wrong way. One of the most unlikable men in football. I mean, he just isn't. When he's your guy, Bobby, he's going to be fine. Graham Potter will be the perfect manager for Leicester, says Adrian McGrath. I'm not sure that anybody's going to give Graham Potter a gig just now. They're going to wait until the end of the season if he is going to get one. Liverpool and Man United on a par, both had equally crap, soulless performances. Liverpool have no chance of top four, no steal in midfield. McTominay isn't related to a top half footballer, says Brian. Yeah, I mean, McTominay was unbelievable for Scotland against Spain.
Pretty good international break, 4 goals.
Connacht have won more silverware in the past 8 years than Ulster and Munster combined, says Darragh O'Toole, which is a fair point and is a sorry indictment of where Ulster and Munster are at the moment. And whatever grief the IRFU get for the situation of the women's game, the people in charge at Ulster and Munster have to take responsibility for what they were doing. Bear in mind, they wanted Johan van Graan to stay. They wanted him still to be in charge.
Yeah, I didn't like the comments from Dan McFarland after the match. I just felt like it was, I understand where he's coming from. Like the gap from Leinster to the rest is huge, but something needs to be done about it. These teams need to, and I don't think it's an academy thing. Cian mentioned the academy in Munster and how there are good players coming through, but the problem is the Leinster academy is just a Conveyor belt.
Ronan Ward says, Ger, word for the mighty Villa, please, on the march for Europe. I mean, what, do they want conference next season? Do they want Europa League? Do they want Champions League? Should they qualify for the Champions League this season when the opportunity's there? That's what. That's
it's in their hands, is what you're saying. Yeah, they just decide when
to win every game.
Yeah,
it's not that big a
Sounds simple when you put it like that. Yeah.
Stranger things have happened.
You never know. You never know. Europa Conference League is where they belong.
OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night edition is available now. Very drab shirt by Shane standards.
Yeah, apologies. But I've made up for it with my new NASA sticker. So there you go.
It's new, is it new?
Yeah, decided to jazz up the laptop. Hope people like it. Change things up, I'm always an entrepreneur.
On tomorrow's show, Neda Manua on Premier League managerial madness. David Brady reflects on Division 1 glory. Power rankings, which Tommy has promised us, plus more football, Formula 1 and plenty more besides. Right now, some of the best of the Sunday pay-per-view. Have a marvellous Monday.
I just think he's a bit of an ass on the sideline at times, Pep. But that's just his personality. He's an amazing manager. And then Liverpool themselves, their issues and the amount of remedial work that Jurgen Klopp's going to have to do now on that.
Liverpool are miles off it. I'm just... I'm a City fan. I'm also a League of Ireland fan. I have a League of Ireland allegiance as well, John. But I thought, reading Roy Curtis in the Sunday World, Roy makes a point that there was no Hannon yesterday, and were City going to be vulnerable possibly to Liverpool? Could Liverpool make a charge, get into that top 4 position? And I thought Roy hits the nail on the head. He said Julian Alvarez just stepped out of the shadows and it was outstanding. People all said it was Jack Grealish and it was, the John Stones in midfield, but I thought actually Alvarez led the line superbly and he provided a different type of a threat. And small man, he's nipping in and out between Virgil van Dijk, who looks bewildered, to be honest with you, compared to the peerless defender he was a couple of years ago. City went behind and won 4-1, and it could have been 6 or 7-1. But yeah, a lot of talk about a couple of things. Leave the result to one side, which basically puts Liverpool in a very bad position for top 4. And I thought they were going to get that. I'm not so sure now. Guardiola, you say he's a bit of an ass on the sidelines. A lot of managers are ass on the sidelines. I think Jurgen Klopp is a bit of an ass on the sideline and beating his chest going towards the Anfield Cup. That wouldn't be something that I think is...
Mourinho doing the slide
tackles. Your old pal Conte has just left. He was a bit of an ass on the sidelines as well.
But the handshake, remember the handshake between himself and Tuchel? That was actually this season. Could you believe it?
And they're both gone.
Yeah.
And Tuchel's now bounced back at Bayern Munich.
Conte won't be as easy for Conte.
Trying to bring Pep down, but... there's a timing thing. I saw what happened on the sideline, Guardiola.
Was he out of line?
Well, first of all, he was turning around to celebrate with his son, which he always does after a goal. I think it was the third goal, and it was a. By the way, City's.
It was the equaliser.
No, it wasn't the equaliser. No, it was in the second half because it was at that. It was in the second half. I think it was the third goal. All City's goals, by the way, were from open play, so they actually carried Liverpool apart. There were no set pieces goals, and I think it was just the purity of the goal. He does love pure goals. But the Liverpool lads were just happened to be walking back from their warm up at that end, and they walked straight past Guardiola as he was jumping up and down. I think it was mischievous at best. Was a little bit disrespectful. Yeah, I wouldn't have liked it. I mean, I was just saying to make played inter-county hurling, and if he was on the line for Offaly, which he was in a famous match in Ballycran, and he's playing Kilkenny and they just scored a goal, and you're walking back from your warm-up, Mick, and the Kilkenny manager Brian Cody shakes his hand out to you because the Kilkenny have scored a goal, what would you do?
Oh, to be a dunt, I'd say. A dunt, yeah, there probably would be, yeah.
The good thing is Brian Cody would never do that.
No, he'd never do that. No, definitely not. But I was thinking in a GA context, even in a club game, like there'd definitely be like two bulls running into each other.
Probably be both dressing rooms then jumping in and everything, which you don't have in soccer.
Well, maybe they should have. I think he could have invited something there, Guardiola. But Liverpool were at that stage with 3 they caved in. I think one of the lads shook hands with him. Was it Arthur actually?
Yeah, one of them did. Yeah.
Shook hands.
Eventually,
yeah.
Reluctantly.
I think Guardiola would be advised to do that again. If that was Man United players walking by, I'm surprised, as Mick says, it didn't lead to something a bit more. But in the context of what was serious in terms of what wasn't particularly pleasant, what happened after the game, I think the stoning of the Liverpool bus by City, there's a rivalry there that's got nasty, and I'm a City fan and I've always liked Liverpool. I've always admired them from the Shankly days, and I've been to Anfield. It's a great ground, and a lot of great Irish players have played for that great club over the years, but the Liverpool United intensity is still there, but Liverpool City has got a bit nasty. It happened at the Champions League match a couple of years ago. The City bus was stoned. Now you're having City fans allegedly chanting about Hillsborough. There's no place for that in football or in sport, and that needs to be ironed out pretty quickly, because that can't go on. That's bitter and it's unnecessary. I think there was a brick thrown at the Liverpool bus,
and unless it's ironed out, Philip, it only gets more bitter. as well. The next thing will be, escalated even more again.
The next play again, But if you take a step back, John, and your football, Liverpool are a shadow where they were before.
But they can't do the gegenpress anymore because the gegenpress needs complete fuel and energy, and they don't have that anymore. Or they have it inconsistently.
Is there how long can you do that with the same players before players eventually burn out?
Are we talking a 4 to 5 year span?
Yeah.
Like, how many teams did Ferguson have? 4 teams?
Ferguson always bought a new player every year, and the lads who'd won the league said, "Grant, we're to go again next year." And someone would arrive in the dressing room and they'd be, "Oh, I'm gone." Like Paul Ince couldn't believe it when Roy Keane arrived.
Galskis, Inch, Hughes.
Players were moved on.
Roy Keane was moved on.
Eventually, and Roy was probably past his best at that stage when he had the big falling out. But Liverpool's midfield is too old. Fabinho and Henderson, excellent professionals. I think also last year, I think Van Dijk's not the player he was as well. But I think last year, John, they were 2 matches away from doing something.
Everything, the whole sweep.
The clean sweep, the grand slam of football, which would probably never be done in our times. And I think that just... They didn't realise when they started again, they were back down at the bottom of Everest and had to climb up again. They nearly got to the peak last year. I think mentally they're just not where they were last year. And the legs in the midfield are gone as well. It needs a complete overhaul. Will Klopp be the man to do it, do you think?
Well, I think he should get the opportunity because I think Klopp has got a symbiotic relationship with the city and the people, and he's very much part of the soul, I think, of the city and the club. So I think he needs to have the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
Now, I know football is much more cutthroat these days, but he is probably the biggest figure. I know Paisley won a lot of titles, but in terms of the presence, probably the biggest figure since Shankly.
Yeah. The concern is, John, Liverpool, as it stands in the league table now, are falling behind Brentford and Brighton. They may not make the Champions League. Spurs.
It's unlikely.
Spurs beat Everton tomorrow.
I would say that Newcastle and Man United are the favourites to be in the Champions League spots, but Spurs are probably the next
one after
team.
that. Yeah. So what happens then? Recruiting players in the summer. Who wants to go to a club like the Champions League?
Unless it's the draw of Liverpool as a global brand and what it means as a club. Like, I think the proof of the pudding will be if Jude Bellingham doesn't go to Liverpool. And go somewhere else. That'll be not a good city. Because when Liverpool were in everything a few years ago, we were talking about Mbappe was speaking of his admiration of Liverpool. There's not a hope in a million years now Mbappe would join Liverpool. And that's how the sands have shifted. And also yesterday, it was a 12:30 game. Normally it used to be 4:30, Man City and Liverpool. It was the rivalry. It was the global game the last few years. Now it's not.
Yeah.
Now the rivalry has changed. It could be Arsenal City, it could be other clubs, it could be Newcastle City in 5 years' time.
Yeah, I think Liverpool have a terrible record in those 12:30 games as well this year. Someone said that, losing to Bournemouth and others.
Just on the style of play, it's you can make some parallels with, say, a Davy Fitzgerald team in hurling, shall we say. There's a shelf life that's usually talked about because of the physical demands that are placed on them or whatever. And at least within a club, you have the opportunity of bringing in new players. Within a county, you're operating on the same with the same pool of players. But it'd be fascinating to see what way they go about it. I only have a passing interest in soccer, I'll be honest. But it'd be fascinating to see how he rebuilds. If he is I'd imagine he's the one to rebuild, given, as you say, what the season was like last year. So it'd be fascinating to see what chess pieces he's going to move, who he's going to get in. As you say, with the lack of Champions League football, it would have been unlikely probably at this stage. Who will he actually be able to draw in now at this stage as well? So it's going to be fascinating to see how they do rebuild.
There's so many aspects to it. Recruitment is such a huge thing. Like Alvarez, it cost £14 million.
They bought him early. They bought him before the World Cup last year.
So the recruitment's right at City. Whereas I look at Tottenham, the club I support, the recruitment has been shambolic. Everton, the recruitment has been shambolic. Man United under Woodward, the recruitment was really bad, and the wage structure was all over the shop. So it's fascinating. All the other things that need to go into Michael Edwards has left Liverpool. Klopp needs all these other people around him just as much as he needs himself.
But it's like a horse trainer, say like Willie Mullins. He has all the stars now, but he has to be planning for what are the next stars coming in. So the Liverpool team last year was brilliant and they were flying. But how is he going to adapt, or how is he going to change? He didn't probably think far enough ahead to think, God, I'm going to need an awful lot of energy next year given what they've expended this year. And now he's left with a lot of players that were brilliant last year but are now flat and legless in some respects, you'd have to say.
The only consolation, John, for those who follow Liverpool, and there's a huge Irish support for Liverpool, as there is for Everton, is things aren't as bad there as they are at Chelsea. You could do an hour and a half on Chelsea. How much money have they thrown at the club? And then the bottom half of the Premier League. Bottom half of the Premier League. I'm sorry, Harry Potter, Graham Potter, I don't know. Mighty Potter might be the one that. Mighty Potter, speaking of racehorses, might be the one to get them out of trouble. But Chelsea are.
I just think he's got an impossible job. Here's 30 new players,
and he doesn't buy them.
Deal with it.
They're bought for him.
Yeah, and it's not that they had major injuries yesterday. Like Mudryk was playing, you had Felix playing.
So they paid for him.
All of these players, and Aston Villa, Unai Emery, just shows they got rid of Danny Ings, Aston Villa. They have a clear plan to what they do in terms of their setup of the team. 1-2-0 yesterday. So
I think Chelsea ended up with a centre half and two full-backs as playing as centre halves. I think Chilwell and Cucurella or something or Reece J ended up as centre halves. Chelsea seem a mess.
Yeah.
So for all the difficulties that Liverpool are having, and your own Spurs, who have the measure of Man City, things at Chelsea are they're in a heap. Is that the word, Mick? Sheep in a heap?
A heap.
A heap.
Tommy Conlon in the Sunday Independent, just on Ireland. I'm just going to read some of the quotes here. Those Irish players are absolutely tremendous against what's probably the strongest team in world football. This is against France last Monday in the Euro qualifier. We lost 1-0. They were forced to operate at or near the maximum capacity from first minute until last. When Theo Hernandez played in Adrien Rabiot down the left-hand corner, Jason Malumbi arrived to make the sliding tackle and terminate the threat. The crowd reaction was thunderous, and channeling the theatrics of his fellow Waterfordian, the great John Milan, Malumbi responded by giving the clenched fists back to the cheering masses. It did your heart good to see it. And if there's a layer of creativity missing, it might have something to do with the fact that the Irish midfield is a West Brom of the 2nd Division Malumbi, Burnley of the 2nd Division Cullen, and Derby County of the 3rd Division Knight. Do people expect miracles? Lourdes is in the south of France, not Lansdowne Road. And he finishes with, there's something stirring in the national side. It is taking more time than anyone would like, as Ogbene said, but the seeds of a proper revival have been planted and are starting to grow. Philip, you're on the Irish beat. I also will quote Matt Cooper here in the Sunday Business Post. FAI needs a result in the search for a team sponsor. What do people expect of the Irish men's football team? This is a question that applies as much to potential sponsors as to the fans, or those former managers who were critical of the team's performance in the 1-0 defeat to France at the Viva last Monday night, which most fans seem to think was brave given the gulf in class between the players available to both sides. For the men's team, a new badge for the national jersey is being launched as part of a rebranding, and that jersey will be made by Castor, but the FAI can't get a new sponsor for the men's team. He adds, the problem for the FAI is that despite the brave display against France last Monday, there's limited confidence about the progression of Stephen Kenny's team and the likelihood of qualifying for the Euros. He's won 9 of the 32 games he's been in charge of since April 2020, missing out on European Championship and World Cup qualification in that period. None of the games featuring Kenny's sides made the top 50 most watched TV programmes in 2022, unthinkable since the Jack Charlton era began in 1986.
Discuss?
Yes.
Well, the first thing I say, sitting here in the studio, I'm looking at a bank of jerseys opposite me here. I can see a Kerry Group logo, I can see Elvery's logo, I can see Vodafone logo, and I can see Sky logo on the Irish women's jersey. And the Irish men's jersey has nothing on it. When they announced the Castore sponsorship last week, a huge deal, by the way, for the FAI, running into high teens of millions. Could even get to 20 million over 6 years, which really is the best kit deal they've ever had. And they unveiled all the players, and there were graphics, and they had male players and female players all together. You can see the lady players all had a sponsor on the jersey, and the men didn't. And I just don't get this. I just cannot understand. Is that how septic the men's team is to the commercial world? How much are they looking for? Are they looking for too much? I just don't get it. I don't know why someone hasn't come on board. But maybe after Monday, people are. After Monday's game, there might be a change of mind on the commercial side of it. Someone might decide to take a punt, and they should. It was probably the best performance under Kenny. I always set the bar by Kenny was the Portugal game away, where we led 1-0 at 89 minutes and we lost 2-1 Ronaldo. That performance on Monday probably eclipsed it. We lost. Always hard to take it when you play well and you lose, and you know that. But the ledger says 0 points. And if you look at it, baldly, and I have a bald head, if you look at the stats, the figures, we're not in a good position in terms of the group. France are going to come first. We'll have to battle very hard to come second. We've struggled to be competitive in any competitive campaign, in any qualification campaign under Kenny. We have struggled to be competitive. But we were competitive on Monday night. And did we deserve a draw? I thought we probably did actually on the night. What I didn't see coming, and I made the point in the Daily Mail that before the game, I could see Ireland. I actually thought we might actually get a draw, and I made the reason why. We had an extra run in, 2 days less, 2 days more to prepare. France had to travel. France had played Holland on Friday night. I may have thought, that's the hard game out of the way for the weekend. Sure, it's only little old Ireland. We were ready for them. We were in the trenches ready for them. Kenny did say the thing about ice and fire, and he got that bang on. But for 70 minutes, we were just, it was containment, and then we suddenly found this late hurrah, this late surge, and we were excellent. But for the keeper, we would have got a draw, and we deserved a draw. But where does it leave us in terms of the overall group? One last thing I will say, John, and it was an excellent performance, but I believe with this, should we have been playing France at all? And this goes back to my point that I've been making in the Irish Daily Mail for a while. When Kenny took over, we were second seeds. We we dropped to the third seeds because we couldn't beat Bulgaria at home in a Nations League game. So we got Serbia in the World Cup. We would have avoided them. We got France in the Euros. We would have avoided them had we been a second seed. So the progress that we're making is slow, and even like Benny talks about here about a winning mentality won't happen overnight, but we need to start winning matches that matter because we need to get our seeding up, so we avoid playing France, so we avoid heroic
Do you see enough
defeats.
encouragement on Monday to feel that we can get more consistency into the team now?
Well, consistency has been a problem under Kenny. Every time we take a step forward, we take a step back. You know, we've had 6 really, really big matches under Kenny. The big matches, the 6 big matches we've had were Slovakia in the Euros, Portugal away home, Serbia home and away, and France at home in the Euros, and we haven't won any of them. I wouldn't expect us to win 3 of them, but we might have won 1 or won 2. So we need to find a way to win the matches. And Greece in June is huge for Kenny, you know, because the Irish team, if they bring that level of performance to Greece in June, they can win it. And they must win that game because we have to be competitive in this group. France are home and hose for first. Second place, it looks like it's the Dutch, it's ourselves, it's Greece. We have to be competitive. And if we're going to be competitive in the group, come September when we play France and Holland in the same week, we have to win in Greece. And if we play like that, I think we've every chance. I was heartened by the performance, if not by the result.
Just on the figures you pulled out there, that none of the games were in the top 50 most watched or whatever, I would have fallen into that because I'd only be a casual follower, and I tuned in the other night and I have to say I thought it was thoroughly enjoyable. Even the way they were trying to play, it was a lot more positive. I'd say it was a lot more modern with what you're seeing in the Premier League most weeks. They were trying to play the ball out. Now fair enough, they got caught for the goal as a result of doing that. That's probably trying to maybe overplay and maybe get into safer positions before you play like that, but they are good to watch, I have to say. And they came with a little flurry before half time, and then with this unbelievable flurry coming up to full time. And I would agree with Quinner, like, they probably deserve to get a point out of it. And the attitude is quite positive from what I can gather, but it would be even more positive had they got a point. The fascinating thing I want to see now is when they play Greece, how does the approach, how does the shape, how does the game plan change when you're not containing now. You're going to try. You're going to try and get points. You need to get points on the board. So there was only one up top. Was there the other night?
Ferguson.
Ferguson needed Penny wide right.
Is it a 2 up top the next night? Ogbene was brilliant, I thought, as well, just in his role throughout. Yeah, but I'd be interested to see how does the style change when the needs have changed now, shall we say. They need to at least get a draw, possibly get 3 points on the board.
Do you feel, Philip, that it's he's got to qualify, Stephen Kenny, to be leading us into the World Cup campaign?
I think so, absolutely, yeah. This is the 3rd year of his anniversary of his appointment. I think it was April 2020. And a huge goodwill behind him, including myself, despite what some people think, wanting to do well and encouraging and supporting the brand of football that he wanted to bring in. We all want to see a more possession-based game. The old sort of knock it long days. We didn't want that as being the staple diet. I actually think he's changed a little bit. I think he's mixed it up a little bit. The tactics are not as we're not passing the ball across the back just as we used to, willy-nilly, but there's a bit more variety in our play. But I do think he has to qualify for the Euros, because if he doesn't, he'll have had 4 campaigns, and you could include the Euro semi-finals playoff, which we lost as well. Now he's got a couple of chances of qualifying, John, because we have the playoffs as well, and I think that's intriguing. We could be involved in the playoffs next March, and I think Kenny will still be manager
through the Nations League.
Nations League, with there's 12 slots. Difficult to qualify for that. 12 teams qualify. 12 teams go for 3 places. If we're competitive in this group up to the very end, and by I mean the very end, that means the last game away to Holland in November. If we're still in with a chance of coming second at that point, then I think Kenny will stay on for the playoffs. Playoffs 12 for 3. It's not a good return, but it gives him a chance. But if after that we haven't qualified, then I think when the FA will make a decision, it's time to go down a different road. And Kenny probably can't argue with it. He's had 22 competitive matches. He's got another 7 in this campaign, and possibly another 2 in the playoffs. So, he's had plenty of matches. But as I say, every time we take a step forward, is it a false dawn? Because we rarely follow up a good performance with another good one.
What about the argument that we don't have the players? We don't have the players comparable. Like last Monday, we had 5 players playing top flight football, and only 3 of them, Bazunu, Coleman, and who the other one?
Collins is another one, but he's been in.
No, he's not. No, it was. So it was Bazunu, Coleman and Ferguson, the only players who were playing regular first team football, and where you've got a host of Champions League winning players on the opposition team, that probably the best team in Europe on the basis of reaching the World Cup final. Are we expecting too much, I suppose, from an Irish team?
Well, Kenny always says that his ambition is to qualify for major tournaments, and I think the European Championships is one that we should qualify for.
Yeah, I think it's achievable. Like nearly half the teams in Europe can qualify for the Euro, so I do think it's achievable. Maybe just with the group. The group is so difficult. You got the third and sixth ranked teams in the world.
Well, we shouldn't be second seeds then. We shouldn't be third seeds. That goes back to my point. But 24 teams. 20 teams qualify out of the groups automatically, plus Germany, that's 21, and you get 3 from the playoffs. And
there's only just about 53, 54 nations.
And
so you really should be qualifying for the Euros.
We should for the Euro. The World Cup is difficult. I think there's only 13 teams qualify for that. Be a bit more next time around because they're expanding the tournament to 48 teams. So we should qualify for the Euro. So so for Kenny, the Nations League is kind of you're looking to go up. We didn't go up either time. The World Cup is hard to qualify. Are we in a harder group for the Euros than we were for the World Cup? I would say we possibly are. France and Holland as opposed to Serbia and Portugal. But Kenny has to qualify for the Euros because we're a team, even with those players you mentioned, we should be qualifying for the European Championships. If we can't make the top 24 in Europe, we should all throw our hat at it.
Can I just come in on that, John? There's not when you look back at the great team of the noughties or, the qualified for, big finals, there's not a Duff, there's not a Keane, there's not all these really recognisable faces that were playing, Premier League every week in, week out with big teams. Keane at United, Duff with Chelsea, Robbie Keane, be it at Inter Milan or be it at, he was at Spurs Leeds. Obviously as well, at Leeds as well. A lot of guys, really big marquee names playing with really big teams, playing in, Champions League semi-finals, finals, fighting it out for Premier Leagues. We don't have that at the moment. So to me, I think Kenny is doing a pretty decent job with what he has at his disposal.
That's what it all comes down to. Is Kenny getting the best out of what he has? We don't have, as Mick says, we don't have what we had under Charlton and to a certain degree under McCarthy up to 2002 and a little bit beyond. So is Kenny getting the best out of what we have? If people think that he is, then he stays there. Is there an argument that another manager might get a little bit more? Then that's something that maybe should be up for discussion. And the FA will have to consider this because they've got sponsorship considerations, and the team, the Euros is the bottom line really. We were there in 2012. Under Trapp, we were injured when we got there. We were home before the postcards. We were there in 2016. Didn't have a great squad in 2016 either, but we put it up to France in the last 16 match, and we were leading 1-0 at half time, and they weren't entirely comfortable. So I think we can get to the Euros, even with the players that we have, and we have got some decent players.
Can I just ask you really quickly on the jersey sponsor? Is that a legacy thing with? What the FAI has been through the last...
Yeah,
people won't touch it.
It's a toxic brand.
Okay.
It's a toxic brand.
Which has been rehabilitated
But the ladies have done well, under Poe. And one of the...
That's an excellent brand.
Yeah, and one of the things about the ladies is, John, and again, Mick, this is... Vera Poe doesn't play possession-based football. She doesn't pass it out.
Oh, she's Jack Charlton, Mark.
She's Jack Charlton. They've won the last 4 games, I think, they kept a clean sheet. They won 3 of them 1-0 and 1
So that's the results business argument.
Yeah. So there's... what are we all excited about this year in football? Is the women going to the World Cup because they're going to play Route 1? Or, I
just, as a fan of the men's team, I want to see us play good football and get to a final so we can be competitive at a finals. Whereas with Trapattoni, we played caveman football, we got to a Euros and it was a disaster.
Well, I will give 2 things about Trapattoni. A, he overtrained the team before the Euros, which he shouldn't have done. Also, we had 4 players there who were injured and actually weren't 100%. And those players, if they came in here, they'll tell you who they are, and they know who they were. They were exhausted. But I will say 2 years earlier, John, we went to Paris and we stood up to French, an excellent French team, and we won 1-0 over 90 minutes.
It was the best performance of an Irish team to date.
That could be done.
It was the last best performance of an Irish team.
That could be done. And that was the last thing of a dying wasp of the Robbie Keane, Damien Duff, Richard Dunn, John O'Shea era. 3 years later, they were probably just a little bit past it.
I don't have any issue with us losing gallantly to a team that they were talking about. We haven't qualified for World Cup in 20 years, and France were in the World Cup final in December. I have an issue with us being underwhelming against Armenia at home and away, and also losing to Ukraine at home. And we need to improve in that sphere before we can.
That's why Greece is a big
Greece
test,
is everything. Greece is everything, and that'll be the proof of being.
Greece is the word, John.
Yeah, it is. Michael Verney, Gaelic Games. What do we got? A lot of stuff about Stephen Cluxton today.
Yeah, lots about Cluxton, John. Yeah, in nearly all the papers, I suppose. This was an absolute bolt from the blue last Sunday. There's no point in saying any different. Nobody was expecting. There's different views on it. Pat Spillane in the Sunday World, he just deals with it in maybe the first 5 or 6 paragraphs of his column. He just says, "Imagine I wasn't alone in thinking it was April Fool's Day when news filtered through from Croke Park last Sunday that Stephen Cluxton was in the Dublin squad. I know he's a superb leader and goalkeepers can operate well into their 40s these days. I know too that this could be the most open All-Ireland Championship since 2010, so it's all about marginal gains, but I don't see why Cluxton couldn't just be added to the management team where his expertise would be invaluable." He goes on to say, "I regard Cluxton's return as a joke." Now, Roy Curtis, a couple of pages earlier, is on the opposite side of the fence, and as a Dublin supporter, he's absolutely delighted to see him back. There's some great stuff in the Mail as well. Mark O'Shea thinks that, you know, Dublin having Cluxton back could be, you know, yet another one of these marginal gains, as Pat talks about. They basically have the band back together now. Outside of Johnny Cooper,
McCaffrey, Mannion, Cluxton,
Pat Gilroy.
Is this because of Kerry?
Possibly so.
They don't want Kerry to maybe in any way affect their legacy.
Now, I don't think Kerry are going to go on a run like the Dubs went on or anything like that. Like Clifford will end up with a decent amount of All-Irelands, but I don't think he's going to end up with 8 or 9, or they're going to dominate the game around like that. But it's funny, Mark O'Shea says in his column in the Daily Mail that he remembers Paddy O'Shea saying that the most satisfaction he got from an All-Ireland outside of his first was the one in 84, where they'd been beaten in 82 by Offaly, they'd been beaten in 83 by Cork. Everyone was kind of writing them off, and they were back on top again. And I'd say Cluxton, Mannion, McCaffrey and others are realising that, yeah, the vast majority of them have 8 All-Irelands, but this is the chance to really, you know, even cement that legacy even further. 9 All-Ireland football titles. Nobody has ever done it.
OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.